theyeshiva.net.
So welcome to a very exciting evening, and our topic is, as it was promoted, what young wives wish someone told their husbands. And this is an evening dedicated for young married men. I got a few messages earlier. Somebody said, I'm married for 20 years, for 10 years, 30 years. Am I still considered a young person? So as I once heard from the Rebbe, he said that he heard from his Shver, the Rebbe Dayatz, as the Elter geht nicht noch im Passport. You can't always look into the passport to see how old somebody is. A lot has to do with attitude and disposition and mindset and vigor, stamina, merits, and so forth. So if you're young at heart, you're welcome. And this is dedicated especially for newly married Jungelite in our communities who often have many questions and go through various dilemmas, struggles, challenges, and sometimes healthy struggles and challenges as part of growth. And Be'ezer Hashem Yisbarach, we're going to try to address this demographic. At least touch on some important points, even if we won't be able to exhaust the topic. I want to thank, first of all, my dear friends, Rabbi Zalman and Rebbetzin Yehudas Blooming, the Shluchim at Duke University, for arranging this evening and the other evenings with myself and other great teachers and speakers and mentors, Rabbonim, and so forth, mental health professionals. I want to thank Dr. Stephen Gordon for his unique partnership in this enterprise. I also going to open up and thank a special person who lives in my community, whose name is Reb Moshe Zev Lam, who's a marital therapist here in Monsey, and we have done quite many programs together here in the community for people who live here, and also Bachrim who came from Brooklyn, and young women who came over the last few years, before Corona, middle of Corona, virtually and in person. And many of the ideas, especially the way they're applied in today's research and in today's marital therapy, I have learned from him. So thank you very much. I'm going to use some of those ideas. That's why I'm mentioning that. The fact is, my dear friends, that we're living today in a time when Shalom bias cannot be taken for granted. It doesn't just happen by osmosis. You go out, you get engaged, b'shotovo matzlachas, you have a l'chaim, you get married, you have sheva brachas, you settle down. Your hashkafas are basically the same. You're both committed to Torah, mitzvahs, avodas Hashem, Yiras Shamayim, avos Hashem, avos HaTorah, avos Yisrael. What can go wrong? But the fact is that many couples are challenging, are suffering, are hurting. Sometimes it comes up shortly after the wedding. Sometimes it comes up during engagement, and sometimes it comes up some years later, before children, after children, at different junctures of life. And people are struggling. And we're not talking about people who want to struggle and are trying to make it hard for themselves. No, they're good people. And people are trying to do the right thing. And people who are dedicated. They're dedicated to, they want to make their marriages work. But a lot of things that maybe we have taken for granted in the past, maybe not, cannot be taken for granted today. And that's why it's so important to address this. That's intro number one. Intro number two. I personally receive many questions from many Jungelite who are considered to be very good people. Yiras Shamayim, Ehrliche Yidden, B'nai Torah, Chsidim v'Anshe Maisa, dedicated to the Kavanah Helyona, to one degree or another. And yet things are really sitting on their chest. And it's important for all of you, anyone who's listening, I want you to know, there is no question that I want you to feel is taboo, that you have to be embarrassed with, that you have to feel that if you share this confidentially and discreetly, you're going to be perceived by myself or somebody else as some strange, abnormal outcast. And I mean this very sincerely. If you're experiencing something, if you're feeling something, if you're frustrated by something, that makes it valuable enough to share. Share it with somebody you trust. If you want to share it with me, you can share it with me in this setting or in another setting. At the end, I'll give my information. You can email me privately. But my point is, Don't ever feel embarrassed and unworthy to be able to share your question. It's extremely important to understand this, because as the Rambam puts it at the end of Hilchas Chanukah, and I heard this from the Rebbe dozens of times, he loved quoting this Rambam, Kol ha-Torah nitna lasas shalom ba'olam. All of Torah was created to create peace in the world. And if Torah is not creating that shalom ba'olam, if you find that halacha, that Shulchan Aruch, that Torah, that the values of Yiddishkeit are Chalila creating the opposite of shalom, the opposite of peace and harmony and love and affection in your home and in your marriage, then we all have to revisit the Torah. Which Torah am I learning? Which Torah am I teaching? Which Torah are you learning? Which Torah have you received? Because this is the principle. Kol ha-Torah nitna lasas shalom ba'olam. Every nekuda in Torah, in one form or another, is created lasas shalom ba'olam, to make life more peaceful, to make the world more peaceful. As the Rebbe would say, Olam begins with Olam Katan Zeh Ha'adam, my world, your world, our inner world, the miniature world, and then it goes to the bigger, larger world. It's not just Nitna Lasas Shalom Ba'olam between Putin and Ukraine. First, Lasas Shalom Ba'olam inside here, and inside my kitchen, and inside my dining room, and inside our living room, my living room. Kol ha-Torah, there's no nekuda in Torah that does not teach us how to create a more peaceful, serene, tranquil, happier life, creating a home filled with an atmosphere of love, of serenity, of goodness, of holiness, of Kedusha. And if we're experiencing that and we're feeling that, we need to be able to address it with honesty, with authenticity, and without eclipsing our problems with cliche words, and without ever anybody feeling shame that you're feeling a certain way. Because that is often the greatest obstacle to growth. When I know that if I ask a question, somebody's going to look down at me, or somebody else will say, "How you talking? Se passt nicht." And then, okay, I don't want to not fit in. I don't want to be the sore thumb in my community, in my kehillah. So that's it, I shut down. So what happens? I didn't solve the problem. I'm just responding to guilt and shame, and I run away from it. And trust me, it comes back to bite us, and it leaks out in very dysfunctional ways. Now I come to point number 3. This is something I had the schus to hear from the Rebbe directly, the Last Fabregan. The Last Fabregan of the Rebbe, this time of the year, exactly 30 years ago. Shabbos Parshas Vayakel, Parshas Shkolim, Tovshin Nun Beis. Exactly, I think the same kviyas like this year, Tovshin Pei Beis. I don't know if you know about the Last Fabregan, but the Last Fabregan was very unique. The Rebbe spoke the first Sikha very long, unusually long for those years. The Rebbe also spoke unusually loud for those years, and with unusual harchava. The Rebbe expanded ideas and explained them much more than was his custom in the last years. It was almost like a throwback of previous years where the Rebbe would elaborate more. And I want to share with you one point that I could still, in my imagination, I could still see and hear those words of the Last Fabregan. Because I think it defines so much of what we want to talk about tonight. The Rebbe asked a shaila. It was Parshas Shkolim. It's also this week's Parsha, Kisisa, which is Parshas Shkolim, so it's very apropos. The mitzvah is to give machzas hashekel. Ze yitnu kol ha'over al abkudim, machzas hashekel. Truma l'Hashem. Everybody has to give a machzas hashekel. And I remember the Rebbe asked, he says, "Vi kumtas?" It doesn't make sense. The halacha by all karbonis is tzorichim liyos tmimim umuvcharin, the Rambam's lashon. A carbon has to be wholesome and complete. If a carbon is a balmum or a kohen is a balmum, it disqualifies the avodah. Generally, even if something is complete, it's always a mitzvah to bring min hamufchar, to bring the best, kol chelav laHashem, in the famous words, in the famous pasuk, in the famous words of the Rambam, zekeli v'anvehu, as the Gemara says in Shabbos, hisna lafon of hidur mitzvah. You want it to be as wholesome, as perfect as possible. The Rebbe said, here you have a gvir, and he wants to give a shekel. No, machzas hashekel. Ha'ashir lo yarbe v'hadal lo yamet me machzas hashekel. He's a millionaire. He wants to give a full shekel. Sorry. He's the only contribution to the Beis HaMikdash that had to be a balmum, so to speak, had to be blemished, had to be cut in half. Machzas HaShekel. So the Rebbe explained it. This is the last Fabregan. He said that the pasuk continues and says, Esrim Geira HaShekel. How much is a shekel? 20 geira. The Rebbe said the pasuk could have said, Eser geira, chatz machzas HaShekel. The mitzvah is not to give a shekel, the mitzvah is to give a half a shekel. So instead of saying 20 geira is a shekel, and then you have to make a cheshbon, 10 geira is half a shekel, the pasuk could have said right away, 10 geira, which is a half a shekel. So you know how much a half a shekel is. And another few questions. The nekuda of the Rebbe's answer was, I'm saying it in my own words, was as follows. That the mitzvah of machzas HaShekel is not to give a half a shekel. It's to give a whole shekel. And that's why it doesn't say eser geira. It says esrim geira, because the mitzvah is not to give 10 geira, the mitzvah is to give 20 geira. But the mitzvah is this gufa, to recognize that the only way I can give a shekel is together with you, because you and I are one. If I would have a mitzvah to give a whole shekel, I would miss the point. I wouldn't be giving a whole shekel. Because I would be giving a shekel and my second half would be giving a shekel. So actually, a half would give a shekel. The mitzvah is to recognize this itself, that I am half. And together with you, together with another Jew, I make up a full shekel. Each one is a chatzitzura. And together, we create that one shekel. Stam, interesting, derech agav, but it's not so derech agav. The Rebbe once made a siyum, a Maseches Shkolim. I think it was Yud Gimel Nissen Tov Shalamet Ches, that time. Nissen, 1978. And the Rebbe said that in Daf Yomi, the only Masechta where they learn Talmud Yerushalmi also is Maseches Shkolim. You know that. There's no Masechta in Daf Yomi that you learn Talmud Yerushalmi besides Shkolim. Somehow Shkolim had a mazel and it made it into the Talmud Bavli learning. It's not such an easy Masechta. And the Rebbe said, why? So he said, unbelievable, because the whole Nekuda of Shkolim is that every Jew is a half. So Talmud Bavli and Talmud Yerushalmi are two different worlds, but in Masechta Shkolim, they made peace. In the learning of Talmud Bavli, you learn also Talmud Yerushalmi. And the Rebbe went on to discuss how this is between a Jew and Hashem, between a Jew and himself, different parts of yourself, and between a Jew and another Jew. And he connected it then to Parshas Vayakal, and he connected it to Moed Ani. It was an unbelievable, extraordinary sikha. Why do I say this here today? Because this is the key that we have to remember when it comes to marriage and when we start off as marriage. There's two ways of understanding marriage. One way of understanding marriage is I am I, and you are you. We're two separate people. We're going to try to make it work to the best of our ability. The challenge is that people are so different. People have so many different dispositions. Ein deyasei and shavas, that's even between people from the same gender. No two snowflakes are the same. No two people are the same. Certainly when you have a zachar and a keva, ish and an ish, it's two different universes. So it's very easy for there to be misunderstandings and frustrations and setbacks and failures and anger, as we're going to explore. And if you experience that, welcome to the club. That's part of the human experience. But the Yesod HaYesod is what allows us to navigate the tsunamis of life, that the curveballs that come our way is this conviction, this inner notion of Machzas HaShekel. And that is that you want to create a marriage where we really can experience ourselves as half and the other person as the other half. That does not mean you don't have a personality without the other person. It does not mean you don't have feelings and you don't have a heart and you don't have your own mind and you don't have your own individuality. On the contrary, it means that with your whole shleimus, you're a machzas. Why? Because the value of life is that you can enter into a real relationship where you actually really connect and become one with another person. Becoming one with another person doesn't mean you lose yourself in the process. You don't exist. You become ashmata, or you're just non-existent. There's a t-shirt that reads, I'm very easy to get along with once you learn to worship me. That's not what it means. It means you're a metzias. The Rebbe said, a metzias chashuva. You're an entity, it's a mensch. And you have a neshama mit ruach, mit neshama chai, yichide with seichel, with midas, with a brain, with a heart. And you have your kishreines and your chushim, and your struggles and your virtues and your blessings and your talents and your resources and your gift. Begashmis beruchnes. And yet, with that, I come to recognize that the fullness of my identity, the fullness of my life is when I become integrated and interconnected 24 hours a day, 7 days a week with my second half, with my soulmate, with my spouse. As the Zohar says in Parshas Vayikra, Reb Shimon says that a husband and a wife, it's plag gufa. It's two halves of one body or two halves of one neshama. The Alter Rebbe has a maimer in his Halach Lozni. He says the simcha of a chasana is because a chuppah is not a union, it's a reunion. And he gives a mashal. The Alter Rebbe gives this mashal in my Mari Adman Azok in his Halach Lozni. Imagine there were two best friends in heaven, and then they were separated for decades. And then when they come together, there is such a joy in the reunion. And the Rebbe says that the Alter Rebbe says a husband and a wife are two halves of one soul, inseparable best friends. Trein rei in the lamis parsha. Chachma and Bina. Chachma is Abba, Bina is Ima. Chachma is masculinity, Bina is femininity. Chachma is the tippa, the epiphany, and Bina is the femininity that develops the Vlad and the fetus over 9 months. Kemavur in the Drushim Baruch. In Beis Rebbe, there's a Ma'aseh. Alter Rebbe was looking out the window and he saw the Mittler Rebbe walking with Reb Anas Tasheller. They were both Bachrim and they were holding each other. My father used to call it Padrushka. You know what Padrushka means? Like a hand tucked into another hand. And somebody tells the Alter Rebbe, Trein rei in the lamis parsha. Two inseparable friends. It's an expression in Zohar about Chachma and Bina. So the Alter Rebbe looked and he said one word, Halavai. Because as we know in later years, there was a split. Reb Anas Tasheller went his own way. But Trein rei in the lamis parsha is very profound. There's Chachma and there's Bina. And then Chachma and Bina realize we want to become two friends that are inseparable. And then marriage becomes a blissful experience, not because there's no struggles in life, not because there's no responsibilities. Life is not just one long vacation where we watch a sunset and sing poetry to each other, halavai, maybe for some people. But it's because there's a trust and a loyalty and a dedication that pervades your entire day and your entire night. But that takes work. So there's two ways of experiencing marriage. One is, I'm whole, you're whole, let's try to make it work. But there's so many bumps and there's so many things that can go wrong, and therefore it's likely that they will go wrong. And it's why in certain cultures, so many marriages break up. The Yesod HaYesodus of Yahadus is to be able to realize that Tachlis Brias Ha'olam and Tachlis Yeridus HaNeshama Lamata is to be able to create a binyan adiyad and to enter into this type of relationship. As I said last night to the Bachrim, the first thing the Torah says is Loi Toiv, is not good, is not Gilei Arai, is not Shvichas Damim, not Avodah Zarah. The first thing the Torah says is Loi Toiv Heyois Ha'odam Levadoi. The master of the universe, the Riboin Kaloi Lamim, established Loi Toiv Heyois Ha'odam Levadoi. It's not good for Adam to be alone. Esel Hayese connected. Essential to the fabric of creation is, I don't want to be alone. And it's not good for me to be alone. Even if I need time alone. Different people have different, some people are people's people, some people are very social, some people are party animals, some people are bookworms. Parshas told us, Baruch is the whole story with Reb Chanina ben Tradian and Rabbi Yossi ben Kisben Avodah Zarah Yud Zayin. And Torah told us. Different types of dispositions, people who like people and like social life, and people who love sitting in their own room and they would rather not be bothered 50 years. Still, Loi Toiv Yoisa Adam Levada. And that's the idea that you're a machzis and I'm a machzis, and we can really, really trust that process. And for that, we have to trust each other. Then life is transformed. Because then marital life means you have a true and authentic friend. As you will see, you may not always agree with each other. You may sometimes struggle with each other. You may sometimes have difficulties with each other, but it doesn't take away from the machzis hashekel. Which brings us now to the next point. Those of you who are bakant, even a little bit with the world of the Last Fabregan and the world of the Rebbe Sichos, know this very well. But I want to apply it here to life, and here I want to begin the journey with you this evening. Because everything I said is very nice. Shalom bayis, kol ha'torah ni'elas shalom ba'olam, machzis hashekel. All's good and fine, beautiful, wonderful. How? How do I do it? How do I do it? So there are those who don't have this question. Somehow, Baruch Hashem, it just cruises along. Almei menucha yishina aleini, nafshi yishovev, yancheni v'magle tzedek l'man shmoi. But then there's others who experience the second pasuk. Gam ki elech begeit salmavas. Lo yireh ra ki atei madi. Shiftecho mishantach eimei nachamone. How do we create a tarech lefanai shulchan? A beautiful shulchan, a beautiful table, a beautiful home, neged seirei. That you should have ach toiv chesed yedefuchem kol yemei chayechem, so you're able to sit beveis Hashem, and your home should be a beis Hashem la'orech yamim, as the David HaMelech tells us in Tehillim. Step number 1. The Rabbi Gon has a famous chiddush in the Rambam. There are a few contradictions in Rambam. Hilchis Ishus Pei Gimel, the Rambam says that before Kiddushin you have to make a bracha, which we make in the beginning of a chuppah, Shedeshanu Mitzvayis of Tzivanu, Al Harayas, V'hitir Lanu, Asalanu, As Harayas, V'hitir Lanu, etc. Mekadosh Amisodei Chuppah V'Kiddush. And the Rambam says you can only make the bracha before Kiddush, and after Kiddush and it's over, it's a bracha levatala. In Hilchis Ishus Perik Yud, when it comes to Nisuyin, you make Sheva brachas. The Rambam says you can do it after the Nisuyin also, after the chuppah also, even a few days later, even some time later. As to the Rakachava, what happened? And the Rakachava is Mechiach, the Shittas HaRambam, that Nisuyin, what he calls in halachic terms, it's his phrase. And the Rebbe took this phrase and started to employ it for so many other issues. Pu'ulan Imshachas. That the Shibud Habal, the dedication of the Baal to the wife in Nisuyin, where you become a full-fledged husband and wife, and you go home and you start playing house together, it's not a Pu'ula that's one time. It's a Pu'ula that halacha sees as being renewed every single moment of marriage, every single moment of Nisuyin. The Shibud is renewed, the Chasen is renewed, the Chuppah is renewed, and therefore you can make a bracha later also. Why? Because it's still a bracha on something that didn't happen yet, because the Nisuyin of yesterday has to be renewed today. And the Rebbe once shared a story, it's a fantastic story. The Rakachava once met Reb Chaim Brisker, they were old chavrusas, and the Rakachava shared this with Reb Chaim. Reb Chaim didn't, Rav Zevin says, Reb Chaim didn't like the word so much. So he tells the Rakachava, Mazel Tov. And the Rebbe said it, the Rebbe said, gefragt, was ist the Mazel Tov? So the Rebbe smiled, he says, hat Reb Chaim Brisker gesagt. Hast du erst Chasna gehabt? Kommt dir a Mazel Tov? You just got married. Say a Mazel Tov. I heard once a sequence of the story that the Rakachava said that the Mazel Tov that you told me at my wedding also continues. You don't have to tell me again Mazel Tov. I don't know if it's true. I don't think Rav Zevin, the Rebbe didn't say this, and I don't think Rav Zevin brings this detail, but I once read it. And with this, he answers many other problems in the Rambam when it comes to Nisuyin and Kiddushin, the Chsei Malug. It's a whole sugi. It's not for now. But what's the Havana? What's the Havana in this? What's wrong? You made a chuppah, you got married, and now go play out. So the pshat is, the Rebbe explained this once, Yutas Kislev Tovshin Chav, it's a hafla de kabir. Whenever you have two things that are opposite, that need to converge and become one, it's not enough to do it one time. Because naturally, innately, it's going to revert back to its natural state, and its natural state is separateness. The famous mashal of the Tzemach Tzedek, and later from the Rebbe Rashab, the mashal of the rock. When I throw up a rock, it's not going to stay in the air because the laws of gravity demand that it should come back. As long as my koyach, my energy, is in the rock or in the ball, it's going to continue flying. The moment my energy is gone, it reverts back to its natural state, and according to the laws of nature, it falls back to the ground. If you're developing something that's not contrary to its nature, then it could remain there even when you stop creating it. In the famous mashal of Shara Yichud V'Emunah Perek Beis, somebody, a silversmith, takes a goblet of silver and turns it into a menorah, and even if he goes away, the menorah stays a menorah. But if you're doing something that's contrary to the nature of the object, then you have to renew it and recreate it every single moment. And that's the reason that the world has to be recreated every moment. And that's the reason, he explains there at length, Yesh she'ela behektish. After hektish, you can always retract it. Why? Because hektish, again, it's uniting two opposites. You're taking the physical matter and you're turning it into something that's divine. You're going against the natural gulf that heaven and earth are separate. And therefore it has to be recreated. The hektish has to be recreated every moment, and therefore every moment you can take it back. This gives us unbelievable perspective in marriage. Because what happens is, and this is one of the great struggles, and I'm teaching it this way because I want to show you how an insight of the Rakachava and Rambam, which l'chayr is pure lumdus, and a debate he had with Reb Chaim Brisker, and the way Chassidus applies it to the creation of the world, and the way that Rebbe applies it to Hektish and to Truma and to Karbonis and to other sugyas in Nigla. comes out in the most practical and relevant way every day in marriage. That essentially the Rakachava is saying when you're connecting two opposites, a one-time event will not solve it, will not create the achdus. The unity has to be recreated every single moment. Why is this so important to understand? Because many people get frustrated. We got married, it was great, and I'm just expecting it to continue this way with absolute tranquility, but it's not that way. The natural tendency of two opposites that come together is to go back. Go back. Everybody goes back to their world. That's nature. That's natural. And if you want to undo that, in other words, you want to be married, you want to be happily married, it's a pa'ul and imsheches. Nisuyin has to be b'chol rega v'rega, halachically. So there's the part that the halacha does, but then there's the part that you and me have to do. And by the way, this is true many, many years later. A couple comes to me the other day. They went on vacation for 3 weeks, Cancun. They had a beautiful, beautiful time. They came home. They thought it's going to be Almei Menuchis in Aleini. And they're arguing things are not going well. They're relying on the fact that there's no pull in Shechas. There was a one-time event. We had great 3 weeks, and that's it. It continues this way. No. The natural tendency of a marriage in most cases is, and I want you to understand this, is to disintegrate. The husband goes one way and the wife goes the other way, emotionally speaking. There are exceptions, but don't get frustrated if you're not one of those yichidei zgula mamish who are part of that exception. What does this mean practically? It means that we constantly have to, consciously and deliberately, b'kavana, reignite the connection and reestablish the fact that I'm in the game, I'm in this marriage, I'm a machzis hashekel. Because naturally I go away from being a machzis hashekel. I don't want to be a machzis hashekel. Life is tough. It's hard to trust. It's hard to say every moment of the day I'm half. I'm not half. I could be stabbed if I'm half. It's too vulnerable. I run away. So we constantly have to remind each other, and we have to do it together. It can't come from one person. I'm happy to be your machzis. You're happy to be my machzis. I'm here, I'm loyal, I'm dedicated, I'm present. And this is a very, very subtle, but very deep thing. I asked a very big marriage therapist. He has probably helped hundreds and hundreds of couples, maybe thousands. And I asked him, how long does it take for a couple to start drifting away emotionally if they do not remind each other how much they're connected and how much they love each other and how much they're here for each other? And he told me these words, you may laugh. He said, every 3 hours, a husband and a wife have to remind each other and tell each other, we're one. I'm in. I'm thinking about you. You're thinking about me. I trust you. You trust me. I'm leaning on you. Leaning on me. I told him, he says, you're right. But you know what? After 9 hours, you come home at night, you could do Hashlama, this Pesach Sheni. But he says, but if you wait 3 weeks, if you wait 2 weeks, 3 hours, after 3 hours, you start drifting. But the drifting is very, very small. So you come home at night and you're mashlam and you're fine. You're away for a day or 2 days, you bring it back together. But he says, if a day passes and another day and a third day and a fourth day, after a week, 2 weeks, it's very, very hard. This is not true with your brother or your sister. I may not see my brother for a few weeks. Sometimes I may not see my brother for a longer time. I meet him and we go back to the same conversation where we were 2 months earlier. And it's fine. But with a husband and a wife, it doesn't work that way because 2 reasons. Number one, you're dealing about 2 hafchim. You're dealing with 2 opposites. And Likutei Torah, Shir Hashirim, the Ma'ameh Ketzad Menachtim Lifnei HaKala, the Alter Rebbe says, a man represents this mayim and eish, fire and water. And he says every shidduch is a convergence, it's a unity between fire and water. Fire and water are opposites. You need to work to create it. B'chol rega v'rega. That's why it's a pul and imshachas. And the Alter Rebbe explains there, that's why at a chasana, you have to lift up the chasan, you have to lift up the kala, for them to be able to go to a space where they could be machzis hashekel, and the lashon of chassidus take them out of mamala kalalman to sovev kalalman. Moide de kamaymer. The Alter Rebbe said it by the Zlob and the Chasana, Rabbi Yitzchak Baditchever. Rabbi Yitzchak Baditchever's grandson married Alter Rebbe's granddaughter, the Mittel Rebbe's daughter. Shabbos Nosoi, Erev Shabbos Nosoi, Tovkuf Samach Zayin. Ketzad Menachtim Lifnei HaKala, Likutei Torah Shir Hashirim, Daf Mem Ches. Another reason is because we rely on each other so much. It's such a vulnerable relationship. It's a machzis hashaka relationship. And yeah, you always have to remind me that you're not gonna allow me to hang out out dry. You're not gonna throw me under the bus. These are very subtle things. Now, I want to show you what this means practically on an everyday level. What this means is as follows. Because this is the truth, every communication between you and your wife is either an opportunity to become closer or to become further. It's not neutral. If marriage was a stable relationship, everything would be different. Marriage inherently is an unstable relationship. And this is one of the things that people often don't understand. And it's difficult for them to accept. No, my marriage is stable. I'm telling you, besides a few exceptions, marriage inherently is unstable. That's what he says in Likutei Torah. It's too hafchim. It's inherently unstable. Inherently, it falls apart. It's too intense. It's too powerful. It's too of a chiddush. And in order to make it stable and beautiful and amazing, we have to recreate it. We don't have to recreate it from new, but we have to continue what was created the last moment. I can't expect my beautiful plant just to continue growing. I have to water it every day or every few days. I can't expect my beautiful candle to continue burning forever. Maybe 8 days. You have to replenish it with oil. That's a relationship. You have to put in the oil. You have to water the plant. It's so important. You need the shemen. You need the mayim. Nigla de Torah. Razin de Torah. As the Mittler Rebbe explains in Imrei Bin. And that's why every communication in marriage either brings you closer or causes you to drift away. So I'll give you an example. I live in Muncie. We have a forest behind my house. The birds love hanging out there. If I'm sitting at the table, I'm drinking a cup of coffee, and I'm looking in a sefer, or I'm reading something else. My wife comes into the kitchen. She looks outside, and she sees we have a beautiful red bird that comes around during the spring months. Beautiful red bird and a beautiful blue bird. And she says to me, why, Yosef Yitzchak? Look at this bird outside. What's my response? I could do different things. I could do what some men do, which is grunt. I'm busy now. Don't you see I'm busy? I'm busy. I really have to finish this. I can do that. Or I could look up like begrudgingly, oh, here we go again with the red bird. It's like, okay, yeah, I see the red bird, next. Or I could stop and look out and say, wow, wow. And I don't mean to lie. I mean to be authentic, because every communication between you and your wife in marriage either brings you closer or causes you to drift away even a little bit. You're dealing with a very vulnerable and fragile relationship. When you can accept this, marriage can be awesome. When you don't realize how fragile it is, marriage actually becomes much more difficult. It's like if you're carrying something very, very fragile, if you know it's fragile, you know exactly what it is, how to treat it, how to prepare yourself. But when you thought it wasn't fragile, it was simple. I get along with my sisters. I get along with my cousins, I get along with my mother, I get along with my bubba, I get along with my aunt. It's not fragile. I get along with the Bachrim in my class. I was in a dormitory for many years. I traveled here, I traveled there. I was very popular. When you don't realize how fragile it is, then you don't know how to relate to it. And then you don't understand why things are cracking all over you, all over the place. So realize, if I continue reading that newspaper or Lahavdalat Sefer, and I'm like, I'm busy now. It wasn't just I ignored her, big deal. It was an opportunity because we could have become closer, but I missed it. Okay, we all do that. That's fine. But realize that. Which brings us to the next point. I'm going to tell you a word from the Vilna Gaon. There's a Mishnah in Pesachim, and you have it in other places. When two witnesses testify about the same event, so the expression in Chazal is Nimtzu ha'edim mechovanes, or ha'edis mechovanes. They discovered that the two witnesses are testifying in an identical fashion. So he says, what's nimtzu ha'edim mechavonos? Either they said the same story, they didn't say the same story. And this is what the Vilna Gaon says. He says, if two witnesses say exactly the same story, one of them is lying. Because two people never see the same thing. They're never going to say the same story. Nimtzu ha'edim mechavonos. You have to research and see, despite the fact that there are changes, ultimately they're telling you the same story. When it comes to the basic fundamental events, they're telling you the same story. When you have two people, they never tell the same story. Not because they don't want to, because they can't. You want to know what marriage life is? We're driving in one car. We're looking out of two different windows. I'm going to tell you a story. The story was written by a very famous therapist, Dr. Irving Yalom, who lives in California. He's a Jew. He's an El Tada Yid. He has a book about therapy. And he tells a story. I saw it many, many years ago, so I'm not telling it to you verbatim. I'm just telling you the point. A woman once came to see him. And she said she had a very difficult childhood with her father. He was very uptight and disagreeable and argumentative and confrontational. And what happened was, they were traveling. It was before her wedding, and he was driving, and she looked out her window and she said, "Daddy, look how beautiful this landscape is." And he looked out his window and he said, "It's ugly." And she felt so let down by his dismissiveness. And it really created even more stress on the relationship. And they ultimately split apart. Decades later, she was married. She was driving with her husband on the same highway. This time she was driving and he was the passenger. She looked out her window. Deja vu, she remembered what happened. And she saw that from her window, you could see a cesspool. And she realized her father wasn't disagreeing with her. He wasn't trying to be disagreeable. He was just describing what he saw. Her father has passed on already, so she came to the therapist to discuss how pained she was. How true this is in life. We're in one car, but there's two different windows. And it's not a problem. Nimtzu ha'edis mechavanim. I see life through my window, you see life through your window. Debates, disagreements do not destroy a marriage. What destroys a marriage is when we don't know how to disagree, when there's no trust. When there's no trust, when there's no loyalty and dedication, when we don't learn how to disagree, when we don't understand that I can disagree with you because I'm really looking out of another window, when I cannot understand that I need to respect your window, even if it's not my window, and even if I don't see it that way, but I have to create space in my heart for your window, for your perspective, and you have to create space for my window, then it's fine. Sometimes couples argue. I'll discuss it soon about a certain question. So they argue for the rest of their life. That's fine. I now come to another very important point, and this has to do with triggers. And I want you to tune into what I'm saying. Very, very often, the greatest challenges of marriage has nothing to do with your spouse. It has to do with unresolved wounds inside your own system. Your wife is simply triggering you and bringing out things inside of you that have not been resolved. And it's extremely difficult for you. A younger man once told me, every time his wife tells him, make sure to close the door on your way out and lock it. He didn't know why, but he was getting angry. He was feeling distant from her. It has nothing to do with what she told him. It has to do with a certain unconscious memory in his mind that is coming to the fore when she makes that statement. Now he's getting upset at her, and the reason he's getting upset at her is because he is not doing the avodah he has to do on himself. Somebody once told me, right? He was a child, and he came home and he tells his mother, Chaim in school bothered me and bullied me and hurt me. And what does she say? She says, no, Chaim is such a sweet kid. He would have never done it. So what does she tell this guy? You got to bury your feelings. You got to bury your emotions. You cannot trust your emotions. Now he grows up, he's having emotions, and he can't trust them. He has so many difficulties with them. And his wife is asking him to find, she wants to know about his emotions. but he's being so triggered because of these responses. Now, there are hundreds and thousands of examples how this plays out in your life. But I'm saying this to you, that if this is playing itself out in your life, the greatest blessing you can have is awareness. What happens often is in childhood, we experience different experiences, and today we know in neuroscience how our brain responds. There are sometimes difficult situations, and not necessarily one major trauma or abusive experience that you had, that too. But sometimes it's accumulative over years. If you sat in a classroom for years and you felt like a failure, if you were bullied, if there was verbal or emotional or other forms of abuse, even things that you may not recognize as very devastating, but internally you went into hiding, and maybe a certain part of your brain shuts down. Sometimes what's called our prefrontal lobes, our prefrontal cortex, the ability of the brain to reason and to enter into broad relationships, to reckon, to see things from a long-term vision, sometimes it goes offline. Very often, the fire alarm in our brain, known as the amygdala, which is responsible for survival, they call it the reptilian brain, the nefesh achiyunis, or the limbic brain, the nefesh habahamis in Tanya, is triggered in a very deep way. And in order to survive, we either engage in what's called fight or flight, or worse, we freeze. And now, 20 years later, you're a younger man, and a situation comes up, and either you fight, or you run away, or you just freeze. And you're not even realizing this is happening, because this is just a natural response to situations that are coming up that are just triggering old memories. But I want you to have this awareness. Now, sometimes you can work on this on your own, or with the help of your spouse, or with the help of somebody else. Avoida, tefillah. Sometimes we need professional help. Sometimes you need a professional. But the key is to be aware of all of these factors. Now, I begin with questions. And during these questions, we're going to explore some more aspects that we want to talk about. Question number one. Okay. Can you tell us, what can I do to create a good marriage? And what can I do to create a dysfunctional marriage, a bad marriage? What do I have to know? What do I have to understand? They tell us that men are from Mars, women are from Venus. In what way are we, normal, young, Chabad men, significantly different than our wives? Why do we often misunderstand each other? The initial wedding excitement is over. Life is normal. Dare I say, life is boring. How do I get excited again? How do I get inspired to make my marriage special? It's very, very average now. Great, great question. And the answer to this, my dear friends, is I'm going to give you an outline of a few principles. What happens in a good marriage and what happens in a challenging marriage. What happens in not a good marriage. And I should just say that over the last 40 years, there has been tremendous progress in the research on this topic. And I'll tell you why. They used to see couples, professionals see couples, and would think, okay, give them this and this advice, let them work out stuff, and hopefully their marriages will become better. What they've recently done in the last few decades was actually observe couples that have great marriages and see what happens in those homes and what happens in the homes where there are miserable marriages. And an enormous amount of material was learned from this. And we see it all in our Sfarim. We see it all in Tanakh and in the Chazal and in Sifrei Musar, Machshava, Kabbalah, Sifrei Chassidus, the Sichos, Maimonim, Kuntreisim, Igros. We see it all. But I want to organize it a little bit and bring out a few points. In a good marriage, you remain curious, inquisitive. In a bad marriage, I know who you are. When you're dating, you're curious. If the girl at the date says something, I believe this, I don't believe this, I want this in my home, I don't want this, you don't right away judge her and reach conclusions. You ask, you find out. It's interesting. Why do you believe so? Why do you think so? What happens often in marriages, I already know everything about you. In a good marriage, We remain curious, always inquisitive. Next, in a good marriage, I don't know what you're thinking. Tell me. I don't guess, I'm not a prophet. Sometimes I know, but very often I don't. In a bad marriage, I always know what you're thinking. I always know what you're thinking. I always know what you felt. I always know why you did it. In a good marriage, again, this is part of my curiosity. Tell me, share it with me. Some people think, if you have a good marriage, I have to know everything she's thinking. I have to know everything she wants. She has to know everything I want. Sometimes you have such people. It's gewaldig. But it's fine not to know. That's why we have to communicate. Tell me what happened by you. What happened for you? What was your experience at this meal? What was my experience at this meal? What happened when we had this conversation? What happened when your mother called, when your father called, when your brother? What happened at the Sheva Brachas, at the Bar Mitzvah, at the Bas Mitzvah, at the Shabbos table? Tell me what happened. In a good marriage and a happy marriage, we can agree to disagree. We can agree to see things through two windows. In a bad marriage, we cannot do that. We each have to persuade the other one and prove them wrong. Only when you finally agree that I'm right or I agree that you're right is there peace. That's not a good marriage. In a good marriage, we can embrace the fact that we see things differently, but you know what? We trust each other. I'm here for you. You're here for me. I support you. You support me. Mr. Lamb told me a story. A couple came to him. This was the argument. They were in a supermarket, a kosher supermarket, and he was online with his wife, and there was a woman behind them, and the woman asked him if she could go ahead of him because she's in a rush. And he said, I'm so sorry, but I'm also in a rush, and I can't let you go ahead of me. His wife wanted to kill him because she knew that woman. And the fact that her husband said to that woman, no, this person wanted to bury herself from shame. So they came to the therapist and they had this whole big machlokes who was right. And what does he tell her? He says to them, listen, I don't know who was right, but one thing I know, when you're 90 years old, you're going to have exactly the same argument. Because he was saying, I'm also a person. I'm also busy. Don't delegitimize me. And she's like, she's my friend. How could you be so disrespectful? Who's right? The therapist said, I don't know, but I know that 90 years from now, you're still going to be arguing. And figure it out. And they made up pshara. The pshara was that when he's going shopping with her and a woman asks him to skip, he will let. If he's there himself, he can do whatever he wants. The famous marriage therapist, John Gottman, he actually learned in Timchet Mimim in the early 40s. Today, conservative Jew. So he's one of the big marriage therapists today. He says 69% of arguments between a husband and a wife in a good marriage are not resolved even 60 years later. 69% of arguments are not resolved. The difference between a good marriage and a bad marriage is not if you have an argument. It's how you deal with an argument. In a good marriage, you don't stonewall each other. You don't pick up your hands. Talk to him. Here you go again. And you run away. You're present. Because more important than the conversation is the relationship. You may want the window open. I want the window closed. You want the AC higher. I want the AC lower. You want it to be cold. I want it to be hot. You want to go here for Pesach, for Shabbos, for Shavuos. I want to go here. You want the lights on. I want the lamp off. I want to read you. Fine. But more important than the argument is the relationship, is the connection. In a good marriage, there's always the ability to say, I'm sorry. I'm sorry that my words impacted you this way. I just want to tell you what I meant. I did not mean it this way. But I'm sorry that I hurt you. In a bad marriage, no, I'll always argue that you didn't understand me correctly. In a good marriage, I could understand that you maybe didn't understand me, or maybe I said the wrong thing and I can apologize. In a good marriage, I don't say, why did you do this? Why did you say this? I ask with curiosity. It was Shabbos afternoon, we ate by her family, and she said something to her mother in my presence. I was hurt. In a good marriage, when we walk home, I say to her, Chayala, Dvaidala, Sadala. Why did you say that? Why? Why did you say that about me? In a bad marriage, I know why you said that. You wanted to insult me. You wanted to denigrate me. You don't like me. You hate me. You want to throw me under the bus. In a good marriage, I know that there's so much I don't know. There's so much mystery. I don't even know so much about myself. You think I know I know everything about you? I don't reach conclusions. I don't right away defame you and demonize you in my own mind. She doesn't like me. I can't deal with her. She's so tough. She's a control freak. I'm actually inquisitive. I actually wonder. I really want to know what you were thinking. And you know what? It's a Mishnah. Hevedonis kol adam lekaf. Give people the benefit of the doubt. Certainly your wife and your husband. In a bad marriage, I right away know why. You're selfish, you're self-centered, you're just like your mother, you're just like your grandmother. You're just trying to please your father and your mother and your brother. I already know everything about you. I psychologically analyze you, I dissect you, I put you in a box, I already know who you are, and life is over. And for the next 60 years, I'm still getting angry about the same things. In a good marriage, I really want to know, I'm curious. Next, in a good marriage, I speak about myself. In a bad marriage, I speak about you. Meaning, in a good marriage, I say, you know, what you did yesterday or what you said yesterday, I just want to tell you how it made me feel. It was a difficult moment for me. I got nervous, I got anxious, I got angry, I got upset. In a bad marriage, I talk about you. I'm like, what you said was disgusting, what you said was unacceptable. And that is much more painful to hear, and people get defensive. You see, if I tell you, what you did or said yesterday was obnoxious and rude, you're going to get upset and you're going to say, no, it was not obnoxious. Yes, it was obnoxious. No, it was not obnoxious. But what if I tell you something else? I don't know what it was. I just want to tell you how it made me feel. You can't argue with me. This was my feeling. You can argue with me if you were rude or not rude, but you can't argue with me about how I felt. When we speak about our feeling, we don't make the other person become defensive right away. We allow them to hear what I experienced, and then you could tell me what you experienced, and then we could look at each other and respect and appreciate the other person's experiences. You remember the two windows. And that's how relationships become stronger and stronger. I talk about what's happening in my world rather than criticizing you about your world. Now, all of this is based on one rule, and it's called having a general positive feeling. When you have a generally positive feeling about your wife, about your husband, your natural go-to place, your neural pathways will take you to a positive place. Let me find out what she meant. And this is my question to you. When you're finding, after a month, 6 months, a year, 2 years, 3 years of marriage, that your natural go-to place is negative, and you're getting angry, and you're getting upset, and you're getting worked up, this means my general outlook on my spouse is toxic, it's negative. How do we create a mindset where your general klolas dika mahalach is one of positivity instead of negativity? One is the kaf schus instead of the kaf chayva. How do we do that? Somebody once told me, a couple came to see him, a therapist told me, and she starts saying, you know, my husband is absent-minded, he forgets everything. I tell him in the morning when you go out to shul to daven v'sikin, take out the garbage. He forgets it. So I put it in front of the door so that he won't forget it. And what did he do? He climbed over the garbage and he left the door. And she started to laugh. She said, isn't that cute? What a batlin he is. He climbs over the garbage and opens the door. There was another woman, and this person said it over at a marriage seminar. There was another woman sitting there. She was horrified. She's like, what's so funny? That's not cute. That's narcissistic. What was the machlokes between these two women? The actual wife found it cute. And the other woman was like, this is so narcissistic. It doesn't have to do with which he takes out the garbage, doesn't take out the garbage. Of course you should take out the garbage. It has to do with a general feeling. Is it a positive feeling or is it a negative feeling? How do you do that? So what we know today is something very, very incredible. And if you learn the Rebbe's sichos about how to speak to people and how to speak about people, you see that this is such a fundamental idea in Yiddishkeit and in Avodas Hamidus. And that is as follows. It really works like a charm. If you want to live in a home where the general attitude is one of positivity, and therefore if you have a doubt what your wife did or meant, what her kavanah was, what her intention was, what's going to make your brain go to the positive space and give her the benefit of the doubt and therefore have a nice conversation about it? And the same is true conversely with her. And the answer is as follows. It's about how many positive statements are exchanged between you during the day and during the night. According to all the research we know, that you need a ratio of 20 positive statements to 1 negative statement. I call it bittul be'esrim. If you have 20, if during 24 hours, 20 communications were positive, 1 was negative, you're good. you're good. The minimum is a ratio from 4 to 1. Bittul barba, 4 to 1. For every negative comment, you need 4 positive comments to counterbalance it, and then there's going to be a general positive ambiance in this relationship. But that's minimum. Minimum is 1 to 4. Better 1 to 5, 1 to 10. 1 to 20 is really good. What does something positive mean? Anything. I so appreciate your work ethic. I'm in awe of your kindness. I love your sense of humor. You look so good today. Wow, what a beautiful suit. Thank you for what you did yesterday for my sister, for my brother. Anything positive about Gashmias, about Ruchnias, about a guf, about neshama, about midas, about disposition, about character, that creates a trust that is incredible. And now you may be laughing like, oh, I'm a pneumistic guy. I'm not a chitzon. Let me just tell you something. It works. You can argue with me, but let me tell you something. In most cases, it works. But if it's 2 negative comments to 2 positive comments, or 2 negative comments to 3 positive comments, again, you can get away 1 to 4 with murder, but much better not. Or if it's 10 negative comments to 10 positive comments, the general vibe could be negative. And this is one of the most fundamental differences between good marriages and bad marriages. Next, in bad marriages, the love that I display is the love that I like. In good marriages, I always want to think about what makes you happy, what works for you. Not that I don't care about myself, but it becomes important for me how you're feeling, how you're experiencing things. In a bad marriage, pain is always expressed as anger. But in most cases, listen to this, pain is a secondary emotion, which means underneath the pain, underneath the anger, there's usually pain. There's very, very few cases in relationships where the anger is not a cover-up for pain. Anger is usually not the pnimius hamida, it's the chitzonius hamida. It's easier to acknowledge that I'm angry at you than I'm in pain. Because if I'm angry at you, you're guilty. If I'm in pain, I'm vulnerable. I'm open to being hurt. In a good marriage, I speak about my pain, not about my anger. In a bad marriage, I speak about my anger. I don't speak about my pain. In a bad marriage, I'm angry. If you tell me, you know, what you did was inappropriate, or what you did was a stupid thing, I'm angry at you. I'm in pain. I may feel lonely, I may feel judged, I may feel that you're separated from me, I may feel that you don't like me, you don't validate me. And in a good marriage, I could say, you know, wow, that hurt, wow, that was painful. And then you can acknowledge it, you can apologize, you can explain yourself. But in a bad marriage, I'm just angry at her, I'm angry at him. Next, in a bad marriage, there's only room for 2 adults, 2 mature people. In a good and happy marriage, there's room for 2 little children playing around. In a bad marriage, I always have to be an adult. I always have to be responsible. In a good marriage, my childhood dreams, my childhood fantasies, my idiosyncrasies, my craziness, my mishagasan can emerge because I create space for you. You create space for me. An important disclaimer. All of this is 100% true, but there are exceptions. If somebody has a personality disorder, if somebody has mental illness, if somebody went through a real trauma in life, maybe because of chas v'shalom, rape or something, then all of these rules don't apply. You can try all of this, but when you see there's no feedback, the person may simply be suffering from a terrible illness. The person may have a serious trauma, personality disorder, and they simply cannot function in the regular way. Now, there is help, but the first step is to identify it and for the victim to take accountability that they have a challenge and to address it. And if we address it earlier, there's much more hope for people to be able to live with it with dignity and live good lives. But the key is I have to be able to take responsibility for my illness, for my mental challenges, from my trauma. I have to be able to say, I'm in a lot of pain, and it's not my husband's fault. I'm in a lot of pain, and it's not my wife's fault. This is a very, very important disclaimer. Next question. How do I regain vibrancy in my avodas Hashem as a younger man? I don't have a mashpia. I don't have a rav that I look up to. Those that I'm close to don't inspire me. What type of svarim should I learn? It's a great question. And the answer to that is that since we live in a world of kol ma shabara kadosh baruch hu b'olam lebraya l'chvayda, with all the challenges of technology, let's use technology for what it was made for. And that is harvatzas haTorah. Find yourself a teacher online, even if you don't have a teacher in person. Today it could be in Yiddish or in Hebrew or in English or in another language. Somebody who does inspire you. I'm sure b'chol ha'olam kulai, there is somebody who speaks to you. There's somebody who can ignite a passion in a blad gemara, in a perik mishnayos, in a perik in Tanakh, in a siman in Shulchan Aruch, in a perik Tanya, in a maimer, in a sicha, whatever it is. Bavli, Yerushalmi, Nigla, Chassidus, Hashkafa. Find yourself a teacher that you love, that you cherish, and learn with him. Learn with him once a week, learn with him 3 times a week, exercise with him, go on the treadmill with him, take a walk with him, with listening to shiurim on a drive. And you'll learn, you'll grow. And I'm sure there's somebody you could find. And maybe if the person is still in Olam Haza, B'larichis Yamim, you can have correspondence with him, you can visit him. The fact that you don't have somebody in person that you can look up to and be inspired by, but there's so many great people, there's great teachers today and great mentors and communicators and orators and Magid Yeshurim and Rosh Yeshivas and Mashpiyim, and you could really steig away, you could really grow. So it's very important. And it's also important to be able to have somebody you could speak to. Every person. It doesn't have to be a person you see face to face. It could be with Zoom today, Gam Zoom Lataiva. It could be on the phone and so forth. How can I be there for my wife in an emotionally accepting way when she's going through a very tough time? She's emotionally overwhelmed. How can I also work through my past internal emotions, which are triggered by her unrest? This is a wonderful, wonderful question. And the answer to this, B'kitzur Nimritz, is the first thing is, you don't have to solve her problem. Your challenge, your shlichus is to be a containing presence for her. To be able to be there with her. Imay anoichi b'tzara. There's a Moedik Sicha, Shabbos Parshas Kisisa, Tov Shel Lamed Aleph. The Rebbe says that Esther told Mordechai, Leich Knoises Kol HaYehudim. Why did she have to say Kol HaYehudim? Why not HaYehudim? The Gemara always asks in Erchin and Chagiga, HaKol HaSuye Mai. What did it say Kol HaYehudim? It could have said HaYehudim. And the answer is because Mordechai on his own would have excluded the Jews that ate by the meal of Achashverosh. He said, well, I'm going to tell them to fast for 3 days. They couldn't even go to a meal and eat kosher. They're going to fast for 3 days. And they're the ones who are responsible for the Gzeira. So the Rebbe said, what was Esther's chiddush? Leich Knesses Kol HaYehudim. He said that Esther grew up, Esther was in the palace, and she understood the nisayon of being in a non-Jewish environment and having to eat kosher. The Gemara says in Megillah, one shit is that Achla Kadli de Chaziri, Megillah Daf Yud Gimel. Your test is there probably. She ate fat of bacon. So the Rebbe said, Esther hat verstanden den Nisayon. And then he said, you cannot help another person who's going through a challenge if you do not feel what they're going through. And he told the story of the Mittler Rebbe, that the Mittler Rebbe once stopped Yechidus because somebody came in and he needed a tikkun for a very serious Aveda. And the Mittler Rebbe said he could not find this sin within himself, even bedakos, and therefore he cannot help him. And the Mittler Rebbe fasted with Hefsekis for 3 days. He was doing tshuva and saying tehillim and davening with pchiyas neirayas until he found something in himself, bedakos, so he can help the person. So the Rebbe said, when people tell over the story, they think the vart is that the Mittler Rebbe said it's b'hashgacha, that he has to be masak in his own rahanelim. He said that's not the vart. He says there's a geschmacka being in the story, that when you want to help somebody, you have to be able to feel what they're going through, because if not, you don't understand how they did it, and you don't understand why they should be forgiven, and you get upset at them. And the most important thing, you can't help them grow from the experience because you're looking at it from a distance. And therefore you cannot help them really see the light in their darkness. Only when you're there with them. And to be there with them, you have to be able to really, really get rid of all judgmentalism and become like a womb, a rechem. Rechem is from the word rachem. To just midas harachem, imavriach min hakatza lakatza. It's the ability just to be a silent, containing presence for another person. I don't have to heal you. I don't have to change you. I don't have to convince you. I just have to really, really be there for you. And you will see that the impact of that is incredible, especially in a marriage. So this is what I encourage you to do. In terms of the triggering you, the best thing you can do for yourself is awareness. If you could be aware and curious, wow, this is triggering me. I once read a story about a fellow. He was a father, and whenever his children cried, the guy went crazy. He would do anything to get rid of their tears. He would run out of the house, he would put on the music loud, he would scream at them, he would give them every computer, all the candies. He didn't know why. Years later, he figured out when he was in residency, he was in a cancer ward for children. And they constantly had to prick these kids in the middle of the night, and sometimes they couldn't find the right vein, so they had to puncture them with needles, and the kids were screaming. And he said, I had to literally detach from any emotions. I couldn't feel because I wouldn't be able to do my job, and I amputated those emotional parts of myself. And he says when his children were crying years later, he became a father. He says it was triggering those tears and it was overwhelming him. The best thing you can do for yourself is when I have awareness and I'm like, wow. Now here, there are two paths. One is you can actually, through awareness, you can heal. And sometimes the wound is so deep that you can't heal. It's just completely overtaking you, and then you need help. And I want to tell you that we live in a time where there's enormous amounts of opportunities for healing of your own internal wounds, which we all have. Each one of us in our own way. But there's a tremendous amount of opportunities for healing. Great question. How do you deal with disagreements in a marriage? We have financial disagreements, religious disagreements, kashrus hidurim in our house, chinuch of our children. And what's practical advice for the chinuch of newborns, young children? They're not problem kids, they're not teenagers, they're regular little kids. Can you give us practical advice in enhancing a child-father relationship? I also know that we're not supposed to be each other's mashpia, and it bothers me when she comments on my behavior. What can I do? Okay, different questions, but all very, very good questions, and I'm going to be brief on all of them. Number one is, when you have disagreements in a marriage, there's two components. We don't have to seek to convince the other person that we're right. What we want to do more importantly than anything is don't use the argument as a source to create contention and conflict between you. The relationship is much more important than anything you're arguing about. Whether it's kashrus, hidurim, finances, buying a house, moving here, moving there, going on this shlichus, going into this business, whatever you're arguing about, this school, chinuch, more important than the argument is, in 99% of cases, the relationship. Don't let the relationship be ruined because of the argument. Now, when you argue, try to learn about the other person's position. Try to see what they're saying. Let them express it. Listen, if I'm getting defensive, if I'm being triggered, there's something else going on. Can you really listen to the other person and understand what they're saying? And you know what? You're mature people. You'll figure it out together in a way that works for both of you. If your mamish hit a point where you cannot figure it out together, so get somebody that you can seek advice from, aseh lecha rav, knei lecha chaver, a good rav, a good mashpia, a professional who does this, but it should be a mumche, somebody who's really sensitive and empathetic and understands what you're going through, and let them guide you. That's fine. But more importantly is, when you're going into your own modes, do not let this become the source of contention. In terms of a father bonding with a child, this is very important. Today we know that the greatest antidote to most of the problems with children is their relationship with their parents. V'nafshay kshura b'nafshay. And that relationship doesn't begin when they're 16. It begins when they're very, very young. It begins at birth and maybe before birth. So do everything to bond. And whatever that means, on the child's terms. Yes, play together and have conversations together and enjoy life together and daven together and sing together and dance together and learn together and listen. Listen to your child. Listen to her. Listen to him. And tune into their world. Don't always ask them to come into your world. Go down into their world, whatever that means. have meals together, do outings together, but be present in their life. Let them feel your heart. Let them feel your presence. Let them feel your emotional connection with them. Because I cannot stress enough how impactful that is for the remainder of your life and their life. In terms of her being your mashpia, this is something that we each have to work out on our own. You want to express to her how you're feeling and let her express how she's feeling. She's experiencing something, and that's why she's making these comments about you, and you're being triggered by what she's saying. You guys have to have an open conversation about this. Ask her, what are you feeling? And I want to tell you what I'm feeling. It hurts me. It bothers me. I want to have a different type of relationship. If you both can be vulnerable about these types of experiences, then your marriage will become much stronger and much more powerful, because this is how it works. Every marriage has those issues that become its weakest link, those issues that threaten the marriage. If we could learn how to use those issues and turn them into a springboard for deeper bonding, that's a good marriage. B'lashon HaGemara is doinos nasa like zachias. When this doinos becomes zachias, it's gevaldik. Or the Gemara in Menachos, the Rebbe would always bring that from Memdalet. Oyson matzayis she'itzia loy be'isur, hitzia loy beheter. If we take those very koiches, those very emotions that threaten to tear us apart, and we can use those very emotions to bring us closer together, there's no marriage as powerful as that. Because it's shtar sheyotza of irur. V'huchzak, it's the strongest shtar in the world. You took the very irur and you transformed it. You did the tzarech aliyah. What do I mean practically? If there are emotions that are driving us apart, I feel she thinks she's my mashpia, and I'm getting very upset, I'm getting very annoyed. She's annoyed with my Yiddishkeit, maybe when I wake up in the morning or what I do at night, etc., etc. I'm annoyed with her comments to me. She's annoyed with, she thinks I'm detached. She's annoyed with my schedule. I'm annoyed with how many times she speaks to her sisters, whatever it is. These are things that create distance between couples. If those very forces can now be used as an instrument for closeness, how? When we can be honest about it, when I could say, when I hear you speaking on the phone for so many hours to your sisters, I feel like you don't like me. I feel like I'm not getting the attention I want. You can really be vulnerable. And she could say, when I watch you doing this, it just makes me feel like there are so many things in life that are more important. Your phone is much more important than me. And when you can really hear each other's pain and be a containing presence, so now those very emotions that would have driven you apart from each other turned you into inseparable souls. That's what you want to learn how to do, as often and as frequent as possible. That's why in marriage it's so important for people to transcend judgmentalism. And I want to tell you, many people have very difficult marriages because they don't do any of this work. They just think it's going to happen on its own. We have kids, we raise them, the marriage is going to work out. It doesn't happen on its own. B'derech memela is nicht aseda in avoida. You know the word, yeah? 50 Jahre is the Zede proved ausreis in the b'derech memela. You need proactive consciousness and work in everything. So when we could really learn to transcend judgmentalism, to open ourselves up to each other, to become comfortable with our craziness, with our shtus of nefesh habahamis, to be able to be open about it with each other in a very real and vulnerable way, it's very powerful. Of course, there are things that you're not supposed to speak to your husband or your wife about. You have to find somebody else. But I'm talking about those things that we could speak about, which should be 99% of our lives. When my wife brings up her issues, is my job just to listen? Should I tell her to speak to a professional? What happens if I feel that she talks a lot? What am I supposed to do? How do I stop comparing in my head my marriage to the marriages of my friends and to other people who look happier? And what if my wife is not ready to speak to someone about an ongoing challenge that affects us both? Great questions. When do you know she has to speak to a professional? You have to speak to a professional. The answer is, If it's something that you really feel that with all of your avodah, you cannot get a handle on it. Just like I said, if you're really stuck, if you're just being triggered and you're really stuck in a place, so then you turn for help. But if your conversations and you being here for each other and you're listening can help dissolve the tension and create a positive mood, then that's fine. So it's really something that we need feedback from each other. You have to tell me, you're not all right. There's something not good here, but without judgment. Back to Esther Hamalka, back to the Mittler Rebbe. If you want to fix me, you have to feel me. If you don't feel me, you can't fix me. Comparing yourself to other marriages, what does that do for anybody? You don't know what's happening in other people's marriages. It's normal we look at other people's marriages, but that energy that you're putting into looking at other people's marriages is the energy that you should be investing into your own marriage. And marriages are so sensitive and so fragile and so subjective and so nuanced. It's really ridiculous to look at another person's marriage. It's like if a doctor starts comparing my x-ray to another person's x-ray. You go to the dentist and he says, oh, look at his teeth, look at your teeth. You want my DNA molecules? You want my DNA sequence? You want my genetics? It's zwei Olames, it's zwei Welten. Every person has their brachas and their nisyonis. And as they say, we're all born as originals. Let's not die as copies. Don't live somebody else's life because that life is taken already. And who's going to live your life? You live your marriage. The fact that she talks a lot, well, the question is, what's that doing to you? Are you listening? Maybe if you would listen more, she wouldn't have to talk so much. Do you really know how to listen? Is her talking really triggering you? Is it reminding you of something? Is it getting you upset? Maybe go into yourself and figure out what's really bothering you. If you did all that, and she's just talking a lot, so maybe try to help her in a very kind way. See what's bothering her. What is her need here? People have needs. People have voids. We want to understand them. We don't want to judge them. We want to understand them. What does a healthy Shabbos Yom Tov dinner experience look like when it's just the two of us? I'm used to the life with Bachrim and Fabregans. I don't know what I'm supposed to do with her at the table, just me and her. It's a great question. I don't know exactly what I'm supposed to tell you, but whatever works for both of you, maybe plan it. Maybe you want to talk about your lives. Maybe you want to eat fast and take a long walk. Maybe you want to learn something together. Maybe you want to have a very deep and authentic and vulnerable conversation. Maybe you want to spend time with each other physically, emotionally, spiritually. These are things you really want to work out together. If you mean that you don't enjoy spending time with her alone, then I would say we have to go a step deeper, because this is what you're going to be left with. Remember, one day the nest is empty, Be'ezer Hashem, and it's you and her. So you really want to make sure that this marriage is good. You really want to make sure that you guys are comfortable with each other. And yes, when you're sitting at a table alone, you have a lot to share. Now, this doesn't mean she's your chavrusa. This doesn't mean that you want to speak to her about every sugya in Gemara or in Rashba or Rambam or Chassidus or Shulchan Aruch. You're learning. You're marrying a wife. You're not marrying a chavrusa. That's what my sister once told me. She said, remember, you're marrying a wife. You're not marrying a chavrusa. But you want to be able to be enough to talk about, first and foremost, Ayekov, wo haltst du auf der Welt? What's going on? What are you excited about? What are you stressed about? Talk about life. Talk about your mission. Talk about your destiny. Talk about whatever. Talk about everything. Small things, big things. And if we're really not comfortable talking with each other, we always need a distraction of somebody else, then I really have to ask myself, what's really connecting us? So this is an opportunity to actually find out. What are your thoughts about inviting other couples for Shabbos or other couples for dinners and so forth? And what is the proper balance between my wife, my kids, my own personal issues, my halachic life when things are conflicting to each other? I want to go to a minyan every single day. I want to go to a weekly shiur. I don't want to go to sleep without learning my shiurim. My wife wants me to be with the kids. I don't want to be selfish. What am I supposed to do? We had a child. I don't know how to balance my child in my marriage. I feel like my wife is now a mother. I want a wife. I don't only want a mother. Great questions. Inviting other people. So, of course, it's beautiful to have Shabbos meals with family and Shabbos meals with friends and so forth. I would just be cautious. Sometimes there's a culture of couples going out together, and very often it creates negative results where he's thinking about certain things and she's thinking about certain things, and there's a lot of comparisons going on. And beruba deruba, very, very often, it doesn't have desirable results. So you have to really understand, what are you searching for? What are you really looking for? If there's any element I'm trying to please and impress the other couple and the other guy and the other woman, stay far, far away from it. Let me tell you something. Marriage is very, very sacred. Marriage is very, very holy. Marriage is very amazing and beautiful. It's also fragile. Small things can destroy it. It doesn't begin with big stuff. It begins with small things. To maintain the boundaries of halacha, hilchas yichud, hilchas tznius, lashon nekiyah, the way we communicate with people of the opposite gender, is so important, not because we believe in repression, but because we believe in good marriages. I was talking to a group of Jungelite, and I said, if you guys love playing football and I take you to the roof of a big building and you can have a great football game, there's only one problem. There's no mica, there's no fence. You're going to have a miserable football game. Nobody can tackle anybody because you're afraid the guy's going to fall off the roof and kill himself. What's the best thing I can do for you? The best thing I can do for you is build a fence. Ki sivne bayis chodosh. You build a home, you're a younger man, vasisa maka legagecha. Not because we want to ruin your football game, because we want you to have a geschmacke football game. If there's a fence around the roof, you can run around, knock yourself out, tackle each other, and you know that you're safe. Shulchan Aruch is a fence that allows a couple to be able to enjoy life in the deepest, most potent, powerful way, not just spiritually, physically, intimately. There's not a single halacha in Shulchan Aruch that was meant chalila to sap out the creativity, the fun, the excitement, the passion, the simchas achayim of a couple. Adarabba v'adarabba. V'simachas ishtai. V'simachas ishtai. Or as the Rambam finishes off the whole Shulchan Aruch Erechayim, famous sich in Chelik Chavav, Purim Katan, Toiv Leiv Mishte Tamid. A good heart is always in a state of feasting. The fence is not here to ruin the football game. It's here to enhance the football game. Now, you may not see it always. That's fine. It's important to have people that you can ask, you can trust. So just be cautious, because it's important to maintain the boundaries of modesty. People start looking at the other person and they think it's cool, and I'm chilled, and I don't, I'm not a fakvetch, depressed person. But from not being a fakvetch, it's good not to be a fakvetch, depressed person. But you don't want to be a person who allows the fence around your home to be breached. And suddenly you wake up a few months later, and you know what went through that fence? The love is not there. The loyalty is not there. The dedication is not there. And that affects a person's life in a very profound way. Tired of Yidden, wow. It's 9:33, I think I'm supposed to stop now. What do the Chevra say? Am I supposed to stop? A lot of questions. You feel that your wife became ois wife. She's a mother now. That's a vulnerable question, and you need to share this with her, because you both love your child. I promise you, you both die for your child, I'm sure. But you want a wife, and you have to share this. It's hard. Birth means she did become a mother. She's not only a wife, and you know what? You became a father, and it's important. You know, when you stretch, when you have a personal trainer who stretches you, stretching is painful. And building muscle is painful because it tears the tissue. Ki koyi rebzeire, ki alle rebzeire, mi bavel eretz Yisrael, katsam arboyim o meyetanis gedei l'shtakach Talmud Bavli. The Bzeda fasted 40, or another Gersa 100 fasts when he went to Eretz Yisrael to forget Talmud Bavli, to be able to open himself up to the mindset of Talmud Yerushalmi. Whenever we're building muscle, we're going into a new zone. Between one yesh and another yesh, there's an ayin be'emtza. When you have a child, first of all, marriage is a new yesh. There's an ayin be'emtza. There's getting out of our old comfort zone. Having a baby is a new yesh. There's an ayin be'emtza. We have to grow into it. And there's bumps. There's bumps. Rabbi Zayd had to forget Talmud Bavli. It's a new Metzias, it's a child, and you have to recreate a relationship from this perspective. And if you could, it becomes a much deeper marriage because you have a child together. Now you're really one. In your child, you're one. Rashi says, "V'hayu lebasar echad," in the child, because he's made from the father and the mother, the chromosomes of Tati and Mami. So this is a conversation you want to have with her, again, in a very respectful way. And I'm sure, again, when you're talking about two healthy, functional people, more or less, we all have dysfunctionalities. We all have craziness. I know that. When you're talking about healthy, functional people, we want to be here for each other. This is a conversation piece. Don't think you can't talk to your spouse about vulnerable things. That's what marriage is. The nikud of marriage is to address vulnerable things. Things that I don't say in my shiur, I want to speak to my wife about. Things that I don't talk about to every person in shul, I want to be able to speak to my wife about. In terms of balancing Yiddishkeit, your marriage, your children, here again. Kol ha-Torah nitna lasas shalom ba'olam. A respectful marriage, we all want to create space for each other's needs. If she appreciates that this shiur is meaningful for you, that davening shachris mincha ma'ariv with a minyan is meaningful for you, and you appreciate what is meaningful for her, you sit down, b'yishuv hadas, b'mesinus, and you create a schedule, you create a lifestyle that works for her, that works for you, and you compromise a little bit, she compromises a little bit, but from a place of trust, from a place of understanding, and from a place of celebration. Don't let it become an anger issue. She doesn't understand me, she's so selfish, she just doesn't get it, doesn't care about davening, she cares about Gashmias, and he's out for lunch, and he just wants to run to shul because he doesn't like his family. We get into the judgment mode. I'm judging her, she's judging me. And that ruins marriages. It just ruins marriages. And I want to tell you something. After 10 or 20 years, the judgment has now grown so big. You are so filled with toxicity towards each other. It's terrible. Nip it in the bud the first year, Shana Rishayna, nip it all in the bud. Get it clear. 20-1. 20 positive to 1 negative. You don't want to listen to me? You don't want Mahadrin and Mahadrin? Do Mahadrin. Do 10-1. do 15 to do 50. Do 15 to 1 to 2 to 3. But not more. Not more negative. And you'll see it'll be different. It'll be very different. We're struggling what to do with our careers. What should we dedicate our life towards? I don't know. She doesn't know. What's our mission statement? Does it matter which community we move to? Is it just a personal choice, or are there some things to consider? And how do I work on having a good relationship with my mother-in-law when she gets in the way and she tells my wife what to do and I get upset? How am I supposed to answer this question when I have a mother-in-law, Tzadekis, Mrs. Shlomo from Pittsburgh, Taka Tzadekis? The Rebbe says that you have to feel the other person's pain before you can answer, right? But das gefunden bei sich, so I have to find it in my shviger also. Okay. La'achere hachipus, the Rebbe had a lashon. La'achere hachipus motzosi. In terms of careers, this is obviously a serious question. So obviously, ultimately, this is a conversation and a decision that you want to have with each other and with yourselves. One thing I would say is go deep into your heart and ask yourself, what lifestyle am I going to be proud of? What makes me feel the most alive? Where is my passion? Rabbi Sachs used to say, when you have a passion, and your passion meets a need in the world, sometimes there are a lot of things the world needs, but I'm not interested. Sometimes there are things I'm not interested, but nobody needs it. But when you have a passion and there's a need, go for it. You take the ball and you run. I don't need to tell the people sitting here how much the Rebbe valued and cherished for people to maximize their potentials. I heard from Reb Moshe Grona Zechrona Levracha. He was labeled Grona's younger brother. And he told me once, I'll never forget, he didn't like saying names. I don't know who it was, but he says it was the early years. And there was a Bach in 770 learning. He said he was so talented. He was just a talented person. And a note came out from the Rebbe middle of the day to this boy. And the Rebbe wrote 3 words, Muchrach sheyenatzel kishroinoisov, underlined 3 times. It's of absolute necessity that you maximize your kishroinis. You utilize all of your potentials. The Rebbe could not fathom when people allowed their kishroinis to squander. So what I say to you is, live life to the fullest. And tachshav begadol, think big. Think big. What do I mean think big? I don't mean you should hallucinate and fantasize and get upset if you're not like Ploini Almoni and compare yourself. But I mean, don't settle for mediocrity. Don't surrender to quiet desperation. You know, there's a big question somebody asks here today. I was always taught that I want to go on shlichus, and I do want to go on shlichus, and my siblings are on shlichus, and my parents. But today it's so difficult with so little opportunities. And it's a very good question, and I'm saying this behemshech to career. Whatever you decide to do, we have it in our blood. We have it in our blood, every one of us, in the DNA of our blood, that ultimately our job is to be neiros lahoyer, to light up the world. You are shluchai shel adam kamaisa. You are an ambassador of Hashem to light up the world. You are an ambassador of love, light, hope, wisdom, authenticity, healing, redemption. You are an ambassador of Avos Hashem, Yiras Hashem, Chibas HaTorah, Chibas HaMitzvahs, Avos HaTorah, Avos Yisrael, and ultimately L'saken Oila B'malchus Shin Daled Yud. Figure out with your spouse what's the best way. Maybe you'll be able to figure it out now. Maybe not. Let me tell you something else about life. We cannot predict futures. But what we could do is work hard, don't be lazy, and don't let fear dictate. Don't let fear dictate. Be passionate, put in the work, and Hashem will help the opportunities that need to come up for you, come up for you. Take what you have and run with it. And don't surrender to mediocrity. Live life to the fullest. But this generation, so my point to you is, think practical, but think with sincerity. And realize every one of us can have a transformational effect and difference. Maybe the shlichus today is taking on new forms. It should take on new forms. We can't remain anymore in one orbit because there's so many people and there's so many younger light and there's so much talent and there's so many resources, and it's sad to be able to say that 70% of these people cannot become powerful leaders in their own way. So I say to you, don't surrender to mediocrity. Carpe diem, seize the moment, suck the marrow out of life, because you can live a really, really blessed and great life, be'ezer Hashem. Now, of course, you have to know your circumstances. You have to know your limitations. You have to know who you are. You have to know who your spouse is. I have traveled a lot around the world, so I'm just going to tell you a few things that I have seen. I have seen many shluchim, tremendous people, but it took them 10 years to figure out what they're not good at. The first 10 years, they did everything. Every shliach is a psychologist, a therapist, a marriage counselor, a rav, a posek, a darshan, does bar mitzvah lessons, runs a camp, he's a fundraiser, he's also a contractor, an architect, he's an administrator, he's an organizer, he's a gabbai, he's a shamish, he's a mumch, he's a mumch, Talmud Chacham, and he's a magid shias, a Rosh Yeshiva, and a mashpiyach. And of course, a Bal Qaeda. And a maven on the Kiddush, and a shtickle caterer, and a chef too. After 10 years, we figure out some things are really not for me, you know? I'm not an administrator. I don't know how to build. I'm not an executive. I may be not a teacher. I don't know how to run a preschool. So it's important always, you know, the Gemara with Shimon Ham Sunni, it's a Moedik Gemara. I have to be able to say, you know, this is what I'm really good at, this is what I'm not good at. But don't let that become an excuse to dull your creativity and to dull your passion. Think b'chol levavcha, b'chol nafshecha, u'b'chol ma'idecha. Muchrich sheyinatzel kishrei noisav. You probably know the sikha of Punim Tovshin Lamed Gimel. When the Rebbe said the lesson from Achashverosh is that even a goy, a melech tipish, knew that if you could throw a party for 187 days, you throw a party for 187 days. Kol shekei, the Am Chacham V'Noven has to understand that you live life according to your potentials, not according to somebody else's potentials. In terms of moving to a community, of course, every community has its milas and its chesronos. What I would say, the key is, you want to know if this community is going to bring out the best in you and your wife and your children. And what do I mean bring out the best? To be able to create a home that's built on the yesodus of Torah, of Kedusha, of Halacha, and of Yiras Shamayim. Because ultimately, let me tell you something. Life is complicated. The world is Olam Miloshin Helam V'Hester. There's a lot of challenges and a lot of temptations. As children grow up, trust me, there are many, many nisyonos in today's world. The greatest gift we can give ourselves and gives our children is to create a cocoon, an ambiance of Kedusha, to create a home where Elokus is begoli, where there's a love for Torah and a love for Yiras Shamayim, a home that is safe, a home that is edel, a home that is secure, a home that's saturated with Kedusha, with innocence, with purity. Kol chad from shura delay. I know every one of us is on a different level. Different people have different challenges, different questions, different struggles. But from a very individual place, you want to live in a place that's going to bring out the best of you. It's a place that's you constantly have to emulate other people and please other people. And you're going to downgrade yourself. It's ultimately going to impact you. You want a place where you could be humble, you could be authentic, and you could just build a home. V'asuli mikdash v'shachanti b'soicham. That's the community you want to live in. And sometimes you may have to make changes. You also have to know what's best for your children. Don't underestimate the role and the impact of chinuch moisdes for your children. If your children are doing well in a moisid, think very, very hard before you make that change. It's also important what your spouse is going to be doing there, what you're going to be doing there. So these are all considerations that we have to make and make responsibility. And you know what? We sometimes make mistakes and we learn from our mistakes. And when you learn from your mistakes, you can make changes. In terms of the mother-in-law, so let me just give you general advice. Do not talk to your wife about her parents in a negative way. Sometimes she'll tell you something very negative about her father and mother, and we're tempted. Oh yeah, your father, your mother. Don't do that. It's her parents. She loves her parents. And at the end of the day, you don't want your spouse loathing and despising your parents. When she speaks against her parents, it's like when you speak about your parents. But at the end of the day, so b'meila, at the end of the day, you want to say hi to everybody? At the end of the day, kabeda savicha v'esimecha is also your in-laws. Don't fall into the trap. Ooh, she's upset at her father. Ich gay, I'm going to add to the fire and tell her about her father. Because tomorrow, he's her father. Maybe your father-in-law, maybe your mother-in-law. And that's why it's always important to be sensitive, to be respectful. However, sometimes boundaries are necessary. This is where you have to be wise, respectful, kind. Don't make short-term decisions that you're going to pay a price for. I have seen, Rahman al-Itzlan, parents being alienated from children and grandchildren because of stupid machlokes. I'm not talking about chas v'shalom where there's a serious, abusive, or dysfunctional situation. I'm talking about a regular situation where people sometimes mix in ways that they don't have to. Okay. So create the proper boundaries. The more healthy you are, the more confident you are, the more you could be moichel. And the more you can create boundaries for the future. I'll tell you a little ma'aseh. There was a couple that was going for Pesach away. And he had a very big challenge because his father and mother would always make comments about him and about his wife. And he said, I'm not going Pesach to your parents anymore. But she really wanted it. She loves her parents. Her siblings are there. Was tut man? So they went to a therapist, I know. So the therapist says, okay, this is what we're going to do. Make a list before Pesach of every comment your father and mother are going to make during Yom Tov and during Chol HaMoed. And when they make it, you check it off on the list. If it's obviously not check it off physically, it's Yom Tov, but it means check it off mentally. And then Chol HaMoed or Isru Chag, you'll physically check it off. And you know what happened? It transformed their visit into a fun. It became a halacha skit, like in camp. It became a scavenger. It became, here he goes! Check, 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 check. It almost became a mental gymnastic fun exercise. My point is, know what to take seriously, what not to take seriously. Don't sweat the small stuff. Don't turn a little misunderstanding into a third world war, you know? Let's not turn this into a Putin-Ukraine meises or the Eberstadt. It's just important. Sei a mensch. There's nothing like being a mensch. Nothing like being menschlichkeit trumps everything. And whatever happens in your marriage, always be a mensch. And I want to say this, a story of the Chafetz Chaim. There was a machlokes in Radin. A guy got into a machlokes with somebody, and his child got sick. The Chafetz Chaim called him in and said, maybe your child got sick because of this machlokes. You spread sinas chinam in Radin. And the person was so angry, he says, I don't care what happens to this child, to all the children, I'm going to win. That's what Natschanes does. Mavir es ha'adam al daitai. We get into a traumatized ego space where we're not rational anymore. You get into this anger mode, you're fighting, and this happens often when couples separate or get divorced, chas v'shalom, and they use children as missiles against each other. It tears our hearts apart. Why are you using your children as a missile? It's like the guy told the Chafetz Chaim, I don't care if all my kids die, but I'm going to win the machlokes. You sacrifice on the altar of stupidity, of insecurity, of irrational trauma and egotism, things that are so cherished by you. We don't want to go down that path. Even if chas v'shalom, chas v'chalila, things don't work out in your marriage. Chalila, everything should work out in the best way. Always remain menschlich. Always remember that kol inyan achsidis l'shanois teva midoisov. Kol inyan achsidis is l'shanois teva midoisov. To be a mensch, to have midas toivas, to be a worked out person, an oved Hashem, not to allow our deep insecurities and wounds to take over our lives and the whole world becomes our enemies. Or as the Rebbe Maharash said, was is the tayeles von ganz chsidis or von ganz teure, as a fel de iker, haben a geschmack in toivet tanayiden. And the first person is your wife. Okay, my dearest friends. Wow, so many questions. Let's see. Chat is lebedig da. Okay, there's so many questions, so I'll go for another 10 minutes, okay? Here's a question that most people don't like to answer. This is questions that came into the chat. How do I make time for everything that's expected of me? I work 6 days a week. I want to be here for my children, but I need to prepare for work. I need to daven. I learn chitas every day. I learn Rambam every day. I have other shiurim and shas and nigla and chassidus. It's overwhelming to be there for everyone. Can you please answer my question? A few people asked this question. And how do I balance between doing what I'm supposed to do, like davening, learning? I want to be a mensch. I want to serve Hashem. I don't want to run back home, but my wife wants me home with the kids. It's so hard. And how do I maintain an inner sense of composure and support for myself and my wife? Sometimes I'm emotionally overwhelmed. I am so reactive to her environment. I can't be there for her. Great, great questions. Great questions. Tayere Yidin. Okay, Bekitz and Nimritz. Bekitz and Nimritz. It's important to take responsibility for your life in a very serious way. I don't know if you know the Sikhe Chelik Aleph Parshas Kedoshim, Kavua Loi Bottle. You could learn it. I'm not going to get into it because somebody tells me too many divrei Torah here. Nish gefährlich. But anyway, Kavua Loi Bottle. Kavua Loi Bottle means if you have an arla tree mixed in with 200 kosher trees, it's not bottle. Why? Because it's mechuber. There's Kavua Loi Bottle and mechuber Loi Bottle. When something is connected to its source, there's no bittel. You cut it off from the tree, it gets bottle right away. When you're mechuber, when you're anchored, when you're mushrish in your shoyrish hachayim, loy bottle. Life is not mevatel you. You have to be anchored. What time do you wake up in the morning? Maybe you have to wake up an hour earlier. Carve out the time for his beinanus. Carve out the time for avodas hatfilah. Carve out the time for Torah. Torah is oxygen. Chassidus is oxygen. Nigla is oxygen. Tefillah is oxygen. We live in a stressful world. When you learn and your toif is the learning and it's yichud nifla shein yichud kamayu, it's oxygen. When you're involved in learning, you're immersed in Torah, you're immersed in Tefillah, you're a different person. Your home is a different place. So carve out the time so that you should be able to be mechuber every day in the morning. You anchor yourself in your atzmius. Lech lecha. The Al-Shech teaches and Chassidus brings lech lecha. You have to go to yourself every day. You have to be anchored. And then loy batel. And then the vicissitudes of life and work won't destroy you. They won't overwhelm you. But you have to be anchored, and it's not easy. Sometimes it's hard. Sometimes you'll be a little tired. But make that schedule. Make that time. In terms of your wife, as I said earlier, these are conversations we have to have with each other. Explain to her your passions. Explain to her what you need for oxygen. If your wife would say, I need to go exercise every single day for my sanity. Great, this is what we do for each other. And I need exercise for my sanity. And I need this for my sanity. And this is what being a couple is all about. And you figure out with your children as well, especially as the children are growing up. One piece of advice I would say is make a time in your calendar, 5 to 6, 5 to 7, 6 to 8, 6 to 9. There's no phone. There's no phone. The phone is in the drawer, not vibrate. The phone is in the drawer. And this is the time you sit with your children and you play and you do homework and you Fabregan and you play piano and you schmooze and you dance and you enjoy each other. My son is here and nodding. He's like, yeah, listen to what you're saying, Tati. Don't be a hypocrite, yeah? It's great to have older children who are listening to my shiurim, not any more babies in the crib. Yeah? So you're saying my son says I should listen to my own advice. Hashme la'aznecha ma she'atamaitzi mipicha. So this is very important. A person once told me, my kids, I have all the time in the day, but it's not true. You're at work. You don't have all the time in the day. When they call you, you say you're busy. So I say, treat them like you treat a client. Like you treat a customer in your insurance company. You give them an hour from 5 to 6. Give them an hour. Give them 2 hours. And you know what? Those 2 hours are mukdash for our relationship. And then in the house, generally, you want to have an avira of Torah and Yiras Shamayim. What does the house look like by dinner? It's important to have meals as a family together. You could prepare jokes, stories, quizzes, a Shabbos table. Prepare for a Shabbos table. Not everybody wants to say Divrei Torah. Not all of the kids are good at it. Some yes, some not. Sing together. Bring out a treat every Shabbos. Create a beautiful ambiance. Don't turn the Shabbos table into a stressful experience. You want it to be a beautiful, warm, cozy experience. And you have to put in work into that. So these are just some points that I think could be helpful. I have a friend, a younger man. He's a very, very big businessman, and he loves learning. And he has kids, and some of his kids, give him a run for his money. And he told me he wakes up 4 o'clock in the morning, and he learns a Blad Gemara, and he learns 3 Prakim Rambam, and he learns a Sicha, and he davens. And then he goes to work a few hours later, and he's matzliach. The evening is dedicated to his family, and he goes to sleep early. You know what? Are there exceptions? Are exceptions. Now, if you live in a big community, every night is alachayim. In Yiddish, there's an expression, mit kenish tanzen auf 2 chasanas. But if you live in Crown Heights, mit tanzen auf 9 chasanas. It's sometimes hard. That's where you have to be anchored. Sometimes you have to go on for 5 minutes. Sometimes you have to go on for 3 minutes. Sometimes you have to go on for 15 minutes. But just be responsible. Sometimes you make changes and you adjust. I'm sorry to ask this question. When should divorce be considered? Chalila, if every other option we want to experiment with, if every other option was exercised and there's nothing to do, then it should be considered. If there's children especially, you really, really want to do anything to save a marriage. But here is the deal. Ultimately, the husband and the wife have to make this decision. You have to look at 2 things, the pros and the cons. What are the pros to stay together? What are the cons to stay together? What are the pros to leave? And what are the cons to leave? Remember, sometimes it looks greener at the other side and it's not. So this is something you want to make a decision about from a place of empowerment, not from a place of anger and weakness. I'm going to say one more thing. I see young light who come to a mashpia, come to a friend, and they're having issues in the marriage. They get angry. They have they lash out, they sometimes they go crazy. And people say you have to start davening with a minyan, you have to start learning more, you have to learn Tanya, you have to learn Lakutei Sichos, you have to learn Mesilas Yesharim, you have to learn Chayvus Halavavis, Shar HaBitachon, Shar HaZizuz, Shar HaKniyah. Beautiful advice. And you know what? It doesn't help. Why? The guy knows everything. He means well. He's an Erlich, he's an Erlich younger man. He has a blockage inside that he's unaware of. Za ba'atika achid v'talya, it says in Kabbalah. And Chassidus explains that sometimes we have primal emotions that are very, very deep. And when there's a distortion on that level, my psyche is distorted. My psyche is distorted. And this guy doesn't want to get angry at his wife. He doesn't want to be an irrational, obsessive control freak. He doesn't want to be a narcissist. But the poor guy is stuck in his own quagmire. He doesn't even have bchira, and he doesn't know that he doesn't have bchira. And the first thing, and that's his bchira, is become aware of how stuck you are and go for help, real help. And sometimes talk therapy is not good for you. The trauma didn't come in through conversation. The trauma is pre-verbal. It came in when you were 4 years old, 3 years old, 2 years. It's pre-verbal. You don't need Soinen, you don't need Chamin, you need Libun. We got to get it out. And you could save a lot of marriages from this. Because I don't see bad people today. Very, very little. I see broken people. I don't think we're bad people trying to become good. We're broken people trying to become whole. Where's the Sikha about Pul and Imshachas? It should be Yutes Kislev, Tovshin Chaf. Ba'arichis Gedoylev and Niflo. You could listen to it on tape. Haflev a fella. The Chiddush of the Baal Shem Tov, he Toras of Baal Shem Tov, Shana Lavakosav La'akev. Can you share with us more practical tools? Your tools were amazing, but how to make this all practical? Can I vent to my wife? Can I complain about my day? Can I speak about my struggles? Does it show weakness? I want to be a man. I want to be close. I want to be connected. I was told that I can't complain about my day. I want my spouse to be open with me and tell me everything, but she sometimes hides from me. She doesn't tell me what she's going through. She doesn't tell me about random things. She doesn't tell me what bothers her. We are told in chassan classes that our wife is not our therapist. And we need to be manly, we have to be masculine, we have to be healthy, we have to be strong. But I am vulnerable and I want to complain about my day. Wow. Great question. I love this question. So, Aniya Katan Omer Lavdafka. I'm not sure. People think that being manly means you don't have emotions, you don't have feelings, you're just a robot, you're a mighty masculine warrior who feels nothing and you are as tough as nails. We are as emotional as women. We are as sensitive as women. We are as vulnerable as women. We have been taught not to show it and not to express it. And if you have a spouse with whom you can share this, ashrecha. And let her know that you are the husband that she could share with. Ashreichem. Ashreichem v'toiv chelkechem. Now, there are sometimes a few experiences in life that you have to think if it's appropriate to share it with your wife, because it may damage her in a way that it can damage the relationship. You have to also know. Maybe you have to ask somebody who's an expert in this. But Rubim Kekulam, of course you want to share this. It doesn't show weakness. It shows humanness. It shows sensitivity. This is what makes people close. What allows a couple to become close? What allows to become a couple to become close is he lets her into his life. You let your wife into your life and she lets you into her life. Constantly, ongoing basis. And that's the tools you're looking for. The tools that I was giving before are these tools. This is what you want to practice. And when we do that, showing vulnerability, you become more manly, you become more respected. She knows who you are. She feels your soul. You feel her soul. This is where you connect. This is where you can be here for each other. Of course you could speak about your struggles. Of course you could complain about your day. Of course you can vent to your wife. This is the essence of marriage. This is the essence of a relationship. You can share everything. You could think out loud. You can be honest. You can be authentic. What does Chassidus say? What's dira b'tachtoinim? What's dira? What's dira? You remember? The Alter Rebbe said, what's dira b'tachtoinim? A dira is a place that you could just be. As the Rebbe once said, usually And every other place you have to be with levushim. A dira is a place where you could just be without levushim. Atzmus, dira b'tachtainim, without garments. I'm talking here spiritual garments, psychological garments. The home is a place where you want to just be able to be. Be you. Be natural, be organic, be innate. You can be, she can be. And you're here for each other. And then your children could be. And there's an atmosphere of no judgment. Of course you could vent. And I'm not going to control your emotion. I'm not going to tell you what to think and what not to think. And it's wrong to feel this way and really you had a great day. That's not what we do. We listen. We feel each other. We empathize with each other. We create a haven of safety. And then from there we grow together. It's called co-regulating each other. I regulate you. You regulate me. I can fall into your arms. You could fall into my arms. We could support each other. Absolutely, absolutely, this is so important. And that's why you both want to encourage each other to be in this space. Now, sometimes one of you is having a harder time. That's fine. Don't judge them. Don't get angry. And now, if you're getting angry, you're getting angry. Be aware of that anger. I'm telling you, don't, but you are. One of the worst things we could tell somebody is, don't think this way, don't feel this way. But I am. So the important thing is not don't. The important thing is notice it. Watch it, have compassion for it. And then you can make a choice. Will I follow down that path or will I allow myself to think about it broadly? How do I cope with challenges brought on me because my wife is becoming pregnant and we're married over a year and it creates different challenges on different levels? And how do I deal with various conflicting reports and thoughts about intimacy between a husband and a wife? Great question. And the answer to this is, it's important to remember that Hashem wants couples to be happy and to enjoy each other, begashmius or beruchnius, with their neshama and with their guf. V'ha'adam yada es chava. Adam knows chava. Now, the Rebbe says in Tanya Pei Gimel, das is his kashrus v'his chabros. Different periods in life, different seasons in the month, different seasons of the year call for different types of relationships. But each season allows the relationship to be fine-tuned and developed in a better and deeper and more authentic way. Halach is not here to stifle relationships. Halach is here to fine-tune relationships. It's like fine-tuning a piano or a violin. And there's different strings and different chords, different seasons of the months and the year allow us to exercise different muscles of relationships, sometimes through speech and sometimes through favors, sometimes through physical expression and sometimes through spiritual expression. And that way we create an inner wholeness. And nobody is excluded from this. And different people have different needs and different dreams and different aspirations and different ways that they imagine things. And you know what? Like the Rebbe once said, Keneged arba bonim dibre Torah. Torah doesn't speak about one child. Torah has space for every single one of our men and every single one of our women. Nobody is excluded. Keneged arba bonim dibre Torah. Echad chacham, ve'echad rasha, ve'echad tam, ve'echad je'el. The Rebbe said, in each one there's an echad and you have to find it. And if you think Torah only speaks to one child and not to the other three children, then you don't know Torah. Torah has a unique message for every child. Every younger man, wherever you are in the world, Torah has what to say in a way that is karav elecha to make your life meaningful, exciting, purposeful, energized, empowered, enjoyable, physically, intimately, psychologically, emotionally, spiritually. Elamai, sometimes we're not connected to the right people. Aseh l'charav, uknei l'chachaver. You have to find somebody that you trust, who understands you, who's empathetic to you, who's sensitive to you. A Rav, a Rebbetzin, a Mashpia, a Paisik. Somebody who's an expert who can really guide you in various questions that you may have about this. But somebody who understands who you are and what you need. Because even though the Shulchan Aruch is for everybody, Torah achas l'kolama, but there's so many nuances. There's so many different aspects and different dimensions and different halachas and different minhagim and different applications to different people in different situations and different madregas. And therefore we have to tune into each person. But for each person, there are amazing answers that can help you in your marriage. I would like to invite you and your Rebbetzin for a Shabbos meal. so we could learn the 20 positive to 1 negative. I do not think it's practical. Okay, first of all, thank you so much for the invitation. You can also come to us for a Shabbos meal. Okay, you'll email me and we'll invite you to a Shabbos meal. But the truth is, it is practical. I'm telling you, try it and you'll see. I heard from 2 respected rabbis, the only difference between the first year and the later year is the kittel. Why is there so much emphasis on Shana Rishona everywhere? The answer is, it's just a good opportunity to create a foundation that will sustain us throughout life. But you're right. What we learn in the first year, we have to learn in the future years as well. The only thing I would say is, when we figure out our own internal insecurities the first year and the triggers, we could solve so many problems. That's why you are lucky that you're starting off and you're getting advice that's going to help you look into yourself rather than blame her or blame him. Your son is an emissary of light, love, truth, and a carrier of the clarion call of physical rest time that's needed to meet the Shekhinah. Thank you. Question. My wife finds me boring, and I find myself missing the single life. I liked it much better than marriage. My wife is perfectly fine, but I don't enjoy married life. It's too much to ask of one person. I don't only want one person. And she finds me boring. Wow. I have to start relating to this question. Your wife finds you boring. I'm not laughing, chas v'shalom at you. I'm just thinking about the question. I'm going to answer you with a story. A Jew came to Rabbi Steinsaltz, Rabbi Even Yisrael, and he says to him, I find davening so boring. Every day the same words. And Rav Hadin says, the words are the same, but the person is different every day. So the way you experience the words are different. And if you experience the words every day in the same way, then it's not the davening that's boring. Then it's you who's boring. And what I want to say to you is, I don't know what that really means. Are you a boring person? I mean, if you're alive, how can you be a boring person? I don't know what that means. I mean, B'Tselem Elokim Asa Sa'adam. Every person is created in Hashem's image. So you're an imprint of Hashem. How could you be boring? If I find somebody boring, it means that I'm boring, because in every person there is a glow. Now, there's different types of people. There's people that share similar frequencies or wavelengths. There's people who share similar interests, similar passions. But every person has a real uniqueness. So what I would suggest is that you guys get to know each other a little better. Because probably if you get to know her deeper and she gets to know you deeper, I think the boredom issue will be taken away. Now, you say that you're really missing single life and you really liked it much better than marriage, even though your wife is perfect. And I say, marriage doesn't mean you don't have other relationships. You can have other very meaningful and rich relationships with family members, with friends, with chavrusas, with mentors, with teachers. But marriage is something very special that you share with your spouse. La'arichis yamim v'shanim tovos. And see it that way. It's a gift. It's an opportunity. If marriage is taking you away from every other relationship, then it's not appropriate. A husband wants to celebrate when his wife goes out with her friends, or with her mother, or with her sisters, or with her family members or community members. And a wife wants to celebrate when her husband is close to his friends and to his mother and to his father and to his siblings and to his rabbonim and mashpiyim and chavrusas. This is how we celebrate. We don't control other people, and we don't have a better relationship when we keep you tied down. So it's important to be able to explore all of this. I hear everything you're saying, but it contradicts what I was taught, that man is a mashpia and woman is a mekabel. Great question. Mashpia and mekabel doesn't mean you give, and she takes. Do you think a woman doesn't give in a marriage and only takes? As far as I know, the woman is the foundation of the home. You know the sikh vav siyama maseches yuma chelik yudzayin achirei mais. I taught it. You could learn at the yeshiva.net. The woman creates the home. Mashpia and makabel. The example for this is a child. A man is mashpia, a seed, a tip into the wife. And what does she do? She's just makabel it. She's makabel it, and she turns it into a living organism. She's makabel, and then she gives you back a living child. That's the makabel she is. She receives in the rechem, and she completely transforms it. It's like earth, Mother Earth. It says in the Geras HaKodesh from the Arizal, the rain is the tippa that comes from heaven. The earth just takes in water, and that's it. The water stays in the earth. No. The earth takes water, and what does it do? It gives you an apple tree, an orange tree, watermelons, cantaloupes, legumes, sprouts, vegetables, fruits, by the priya eitz, by the priya adama, hamoitzi lechem in haaretz, by the mina mezoinus, hakol hoyem in ha'offer. The earth takes in what you give, and it transforms it completely and gives you back a child. Comes Chol HaMoed, you have to plan the Chol HaMoed trip. You're the mashpia. Come summer, you have to plan summer plans. But then you'll share with her the plans. She'll already take it. She'll show you that 90% doesn't make sense. She'll take the other 10%, transform it, and come up with a solid plan. I'm just saying that humorously. It doesn't always work that way. But that's the point. When you say mashpia mekabel, doesn't mean the man gives. The woman just takes, you give, she takes, and that's it. Mashpia mekabel means that a woman wants the man to show up, to be a leader, to be proactive, to be present. And her chush is that she could contain you. But she could contain you with all your weaknesses, with all your vulnerabilities. That doesn't make you any less mashpia. Let me ask you a question. I had the schus to be for years at the Rebbe's Fabregan. The Rebbe would sometimes cry very often. You think when we saw the Rebbe weep, I remember the Rebbe once wept for half an hour. Simchas Torah Tovshin Mem Zayin, close to a half an hour, the Rebbe is weeping like a baby. You think we thought to ourselves, wow, I thought the Rebbe was strong and powerful and a Manig Yisrael. Why is he crying? On the contrary, that's where you saw the Rebbe in his full authenticity. You saw the Manig Yisrael whose heart is beating with love and care for every Jew. You saw the person, you saw the neshama, the yechida leyachtach. That's where you see a mashpia. A mashpia means I see some detached man sitting in an ivory tower who's unmoved. Mashpia means he's fully present, he's more vulnerable, he's connected, he's attached. The uniqueness of a woman is she can become a containing presence and contain it and give back to you something you could have never imagined that you would have received. You could learn the Maimer L'chadoidi Tafshin Yodala Tafresh Peites, where this is explained more in Oasis of Chassidus. My wife had a miscarriage. I can't relate to her experience. I don't know how to be there for her. Thank you for sharing that. This is an important piece. Every parent experiences a tragedy differently. What the miscarriage means to her is not what it means to you. And the other way, you look out two windows. But it's so important to be able to respect for her this experience, because remember, this was her child. It was in her body. Her body already had Mesiras Nefesh to develop and contain this child. And then the body said, it's not going to work out. Her rechem said, there's no potential here. And that's a big loss. It's a big loss. It says in Svarim of Kabbalah that the Shivas Yemei Nida, where there's blood because the uterus is broken, is connected to Havelis for the potential of a child born that was shattered. Kol shekin when there's a miscarriage. And in Chassidus it says that there's a neshama that had to come down and it couldn't land all the way in Olam Hazeh because the 9 months is a Yerida from Chachma Elah to Malchus. From after Chachma, from Bina to Malchus is 9 spheres, which is the 9 months. Every month the neshama descends another level until the 9th month is Malchus, and then there's Kriyas Yamsuf and the baby can be born by Be'ezer Hashem. So this is a serious process, and you need to open yourself up to her. As I said before, a containing presence, a containing silent presence. Her womb ejected a child. Now you need to become a rechem that could contain her pain over what happened to her rechem. Can you share your contact information? Rabbi YY at theyeshiva.net. Rabbi YY at theyeshiva.net. As a child, I loved sports. When I was a bacher, I pushed it away. I got married. My wife doesn't know how much I really love sports. After a bit of marriage, I started to get involved again. It bothers my wife. She doesn't like that I'm involved in sports. It's not Yiddishkeit. It's not Chassidus. More importantly, it takes time away from my family life. I cannot stop following sports. It's part of who I am. It's my outlet. What should I do? It gets her very annoyed. So listen, at this moment in your life, everyone grows in their life, but at this moment in your life, if this is for you a very, very important outlet, okay. So have compassion for this outlet. But what's very important is to be able to have a genuine conversation with your wife about this and speak to her about your passion. Help her understand where you're coming from. Most important, she shouldn't see this as you being chas v'shalom alienated from her. You want to be able to build up each other. You have your passions, she has her passions, and you want to be supportive of each other. Have compassion for her and help her see your perspective so that she can have compassion for you. If it's really taking away from the family, that I would be more concerned about. In other words, if it's practically interfering into the relationship with the wife and the children, maybe you can readjust your schedule with this area, in this area, so that it's not affecting them. I was not taught this way in my earlier years and in my classes. I was taught to give, to listen, and never to put my struggles on her. Do I really have to put my struggles on her? No, this is not putting your struggles on her. This is building a genuine relationship with her. She cannot solve your struggles. You can solve your struggles. But she can be a mekabel and help give you the love and empowerment that a spouse does like nobody else in the world. What's the healthy balance of discussing financial struggles? I don't want to make her feel annoyed and frustrated and stressed. How do we talk about budgeting and holding a cheshbon in life? She comes from a home where she had whatever she wanted. I'm not that person. I have a hard time making a living. I can't buy her everything and anything. I feel bad bringing it up. Great question. Great question. The answer is, you don't want to bring it up as something to cause agmas nefesh and pain. You want to bring it up as a source to become closer. And you want to invite her. You want to say, listen, I would love to be able to have an ongoing, genuine conversation with you about our finances, but I don't want to stress you out. If this is going to stress you out, it's fine. We don't have to have that conversation. And allow her to make the decision. And then you could share from a mature, understanding place. You listen to her needs, understand her needs. And remember, don't judge. Have compassion for her. Let her have compassion for you. And together you'll figure it out be'ezer Hashem Yisbarach and have tremendous harchavas hadas. My dearest friends, there's many, many more questions, but I think it's time for a little break. So I send you my love and my blessings, and blessings for bracha v'atzlacha ad bli dai, to be able to build beautiful homes, pulsating with kedusha, with love, with ava v'achva, shalom v'reus, with avas Hashem, avas HaTorah, yiras Hashem, avas Yisrael, v'asu limikdosh v'shachanti b'soicham. And to conclude, I once saw a letter from the Rebbe to Yungaman, and he said to him these words, that the nisyonis that you have in Shalom Bayis prove to me that this is one of the main reasons why your soul came down into this world. And he said, in this generation, Bechlal, as we're preparing for the Nisuyin between Hashem and Knesset Yisrael, it's the time to work on our Shalom Bayis. So remember, the challenges that we have on Shalom Bayis is sometimes demonstration that this is your shlichus. Your wife will challenge you and stimulate you and help you become the person you're capable of becoming. She'll bring out the best in you. And remember, in our generation, it's the Shalom Bayis that creates a world where there can be the ultimate Shalom Bayis. The Rebbe once said, Achron shel Pesach Chaf Aleph, how will the wolf lie with the lamb? The Gorze Evim Keves, how? The answer is when the wolf will lie with the lamb inside of me, the Nefesh Elikis and the Nefesh Bahamas, the animals inside of me. When there'll be Shalom bein ish li ishtoi, the whole world will get the memo. Ki mola ha'aretz deis Hashem, kamayim layom echasim b'mheira b'yameinu, amen v'yamein. Thank you very much. Remember, if you want to ask personal advice, Rabbi YY@theyeshiva.net. Seid gesund und a gute Nacht. It was a pleasure and a privilege. Und a guten Shabbos und a freilichen Shabbos. Parshas Kisisa es Rosh B'nai Yisrael.
This class is brought to you by theyeshiva.net. Please help us continue the classes. Make even a small contribution at www.theyeshiva.net/donate.